your thing, so keep it up. All right, I will open the meeting by reading the Indigenous Solidarity Statement, which is opening. All right, so we'd like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Ganyan-Gehaga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Montreal is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. The roll call sheet is going around. Kira has it right now, so expect to see it in the next couple minutes. That being said, we can move right into approval of the agenda. So at this point, if anyone has anything to add, remove, amend, I'll go around the room. Yes, Danielle?
I would like to just pull one of the minutes from the external committee on March 8th to have a discussion about it.
All right, I'll put that at in substantive because it requires a vote. Sorry, it was external committee?
Yeah.
All right. Going around. Yes, Eduardo. Oh, sorry, Jane. Sorry.
I'd like to pull the minutes from the last meeting.
Yep. Yes, Eduardo?
I would like to add something to the agenda.
Yep.
For a little presentation of 2-3 minutes for SAE to announce that they're beginning to seek signatures for their fee levy application for the next year's by-election.
All right.
It's just a point of information. Am I on?
Yep, right after the, I'm just going to finalize the agenda. And then
Awesome. Thanks.
Okay, so that being said, is there anything else to modify? Okay, so if not, I just need a motion to approve the agenda and all items under consent. Did you have a question, Marcus?
Yeah, just curious, because there are quite a few people in the room. Is the C's point at the top of the agenda?
It's under returning business.
Okay.
So it's 9A.
Cool. Sounds good.
Alright, okay, yes, Princess, do you have a question?
Motion to approve.
Oh, okay, motion to approve, yeah. Seconded by Jane. So all those in favor, please raise your placards or hands. 14, all those opposed? 0. Is there a placard issue on this side? Is everyone?
They're coming.
Oh, okay. All right. All good. So if you give me 2 seconds, I will just update the agenda. Actually, this gives a good opportunity. Princess would just like to make an announcement before we begin the meeting.
Thank you very much for that, Caitlin. Okay, so I'd like to start this meeting by letting you all know that effective March 29th, 2019, I will be resigning from the CSU as the Internal Affairs Coordinator. However, prior to my explaining my reasons, I'd like to open with a quote that was once written to describe me and who I supposedly am. Open quote, "Princess, the executive in question, with whom the altercation was conducted, is a Nigerian immigrant whose parents are Vermont 1%ers. Close quote. Part of the reason why I'm expressing this quote is to lay out how for the last 7 months I have been subjected to a letter with those words, a video that someone once quoted princess being princess, and a group chat where people have discussed trying to find a picture of me where I look unhinged, essentially. Oh, and let's not forget the act of recording as well as releasing that recording of a closed session consent training, and that is just the tip. Those words have essentially defined the 7 months that I have been the Internal Affairs Coordinator at the CSU. Because of an event where I stood up for myself and stood up for other people like me, I have had to make myself smaller. I have had to avoid coming to council. Wow, I did not think I was going to get so fucking emotional. I've had to resign from committees that would essentially create an inhospitable environment for me to work, even with the act of making myself smaller. I am still running into situations where I can no longer do this job and be able to protect my sanity. Because of these incidents, I went through a legal process with Sinest, citing that my time at the CSU has been one riddled with psychological harassment, To be frank, the union that claims to want to empower marginalized and racialized folk has let me down due to their negligence. Though there was a breakdown, I ask that the union continue these proceedings in a fair manner by 1, not involving anyone on this council that carried acts against me, be involved in this process moving forward, i.e. the group chat and the videos. Get an independent mediator versed in labor laws to evaluate the laws broken and rights of mine that were violated, which many of them were. Now, here are the things I would have been able to accomplish had I not been feeling silenced or being pushed into making myself smaller. I could have finished my renovations for club spaces. I could have finished carrying out the year with the amazing executives that I know from clubs. I could have been able to submit my equity policy, or at least have been able to have the mental stability to write this policy. So I'd like to set this narrative straight. This is not a narrative of forgiveness. This is not a narrative of victimhood. This is a narrative of turning shame into change. And that shame belongs to this union. And that change could be orchestrated by this union if they choose to do so. Because at the end of the day, institutions like the CSU cannot keep on speaking about inclusion and giving marginalized and racialized peoples like myself a seat at the table without the adequate policies, structures, and just the literal basic care. So I repeat, shame on you, shame on all of you. This isn't about the left or the right. This is about power. Those who have power to make change, those who use that power to create disruption, and those who sit idly by and help dry your tears and say, I understand, but yet do not put pen to paper. We say that the pen is mightier than the sword. So where has the CSU been for 7 months? I have sat, waited, and trusted a process, a legal system that I shouldn't be surprised has let me down again and again and again. My favorite writer, James Baldwin, once said, you think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in history, but then you read, or in this case, you hear my words. For 7 months, I've had no justice, meaning I've had no peace. I've cried more times that I don't even wish to recall. I used to make jokes about how I wouldn't let the CSU be the death of me, but it almost was. Because of the harm I was dealt by each and every one of you, I have almost taken my life. Whether it was due to your words and actions, or therefore your lack of action. Moving forward, remove the stain of CSU, remove the stain of shame, CSU off your backs by creating change. I don't use my full name often, but because people have had their name in my mouth, let me tell you, my name is Princess Olasimbo Diana Oluwafumilayo Temitokwe Ajoke Shomefu. Yes, I am that Nigerian immigrant. Yes, I was raised by those people in Vermont. But when you say my name, understand something. I am the descendant of kings and chiefs from an empire destroyed by your ancestors and are now occupying this land after ravaging mine. I am so many things that do not meet the eye, and I matter, not because of some supposed, and I'm quoting someone, moral superiority, close quote, but because I am a person, and you will respect me because I matter and people like me matter. The people that come after me deserve respect through comprehensive action as well as accountability. Signing off, I'd like to say, if you have any questions, face a mirror and ask yourself about change. Like I said, this isn't a story about forgiveness. This is a story of shame. And you have the power to turn that into change. So thank you for all of those who have actually stood by me. My friends on the exec team, which is pretty much all of you. Thank you. I just can't take working in this environment any longer. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to leave now. Excuse me.
All right, so clearly that was a very heavy speech, so I just like to give everyone a couple minutes or at least a couple seconds to digest before we move on. And I just want to make sure that everyone as well is also all right. If you need to take some time, don't feel bad about stepping out. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. If we could just have a 2 or 3 minute recess, if everyone wants to decompress for a couple minutes, we can get back. All right, everyone. So it's been 5 minutes. So just to reconvene, we did just approve the agenda, but it's been brought to my attention that one thing was left off. So does anyone mind if we reapprove the agenda? Is there any opposition? Okay. Michaela, what was the name of the point?
Yep, so it was, we'll call it, CNESST complaint.
Okay. And just for some context, the issue is brought urgently, so it is something that needs to be discussed unless folks want a special council meeting, but I'll leave it up to council when we get to the point as well. So I just need a motion to approve the agenda as amended. Yes, Rory?
No, could we, where is it on the agenda? Let's put it somewhere like, that we can get to it.
Yeah, it's going to be
With
17.
With the priority basis.
You said it was gonna be the 4th point?
Yeah, the 4th point?
So, can we not move it up? If it's so
We
important, we should
could.
put on the agenda tonight, we should move it up.
Are you amenable to it? Does Michelle need to be here?
No.
Okay. Sorry, that was my main concern. Okay, then I can move it up to be first, and then we can get closed session out of the way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just renumber this. All right, I just need a motion to approve the agenda. Yes, Arad. Okay, do we have a second? Eduardo, is there any opposition to approving? All right, so that's unanimous. Sorry, folks, I'm desperately trying to put this in the Facebook group, but it's just giving me the little arrow thing. Oh, okay, that's good to know. So then I can see the agenda. Okay, anyways, there hasn't been a lot of modifications, so I'll just make sure it's clear at what point we are. Yes, Akira? Oh, sorry. All right, so since the agenda point, okay, we're on presentations and guest speakers, and SAE is here to present their fee levy. Just to clarify, it's not to go to vote, it's the part of the bylaws that says that they just need to show up to council and say what they're doing, and then, yeah. So there's no decisions being taken right now. So SAE, you have the floor.
Hi everybody, my name is Jordan Costanaro. I'm the president of Concordia SAE. So we're looking to actively begin seeking signatures in order to apply to potentially become a fee levy. So just a bit of background on what we do. We are over 100 students. We're an interdisciplinary society, mostly composed of engineers, and we develop, we design, we build, and we compete with prototypes in the automotive and aerospace sector that take us all around North America, from places to Texas to California, in order to share the school's image, but also hopefully bring home victories. And I just wanted to tell everybody that we will begin the process. SAE puts a lot of effort into seeking sponsorship in order to support these projects. However, in order to continue with our rate of innovation and the rate at which we want to keep showing off how well Concordia is competing out in the field, we are looking to apply to become a fee levy.
Thank you. Councilor, any questions or comments?
How much do you anticipate asking for from a fee levy?
Currently, that amount is still up in the air. In a given year, just to give you a bit of background in terms of our finances, we are currently supported by ECA as we fall under their jurisdiction. But in total, we have, like I said, over 100 students and 5 individual projects. We seek over $135,000 of sponsorship in a year. So we are looking to maybe target the $50,000 to $100,000 range in order to continue this improvement. A lot of the competition that these vehicles compete with have pretty extensive budgets which permit them to design more complex systems, use much more expensive materials, and we're hoping to join that and also improve things like efficiency and manufacturing processes in order to create a more efficient vehicle but also be more competitive. So we're targeting that kind of range, just to give you an idea.
Did I see another placard, Patrick, or? John?
Yeah, just a little piece of information that might help you folks calculate your budgets. Depending on the year and the student enrollment numbers, 1 cent per credit is between 7,000 and 7,600-ish.
Okay.
So that'll help you get to where you need.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Right.
Just to follow up for the finances, I'm wondering how much of your current budget comes from Concordia, or whether the department sponsors you.
From Concordia, from what I was looking at the numbers recently, about $35,000 from Concordia.
Right. Engineering faculty?
So about 25,000 of that is ECA, and then the rest is us approaching the engineering faculty or CCSL or Sustainability Action Fund, of which one of our projects is continually supported by them.
I just want to make sure we're getting the procedure right. They don't have to, do they have to present a question, like a specific question to us, or just present to us?
The way the bylaws are worded is that groups should come to council. So, interpret it as you will. But yeah, no, it says, I believe it says something about they should come to council with a question to talk, like, and if council has any suggestions. But it's not like there's no vote taking place or anything, so, yeah. All right, anything further? Yeah, James?
I mean, it's great that, SAE has finally decided to pursue this path, I've, as a person that's involved in the society, I can say that, constantly there's questions about lack of budget for this part or that part, or, we need more money to build this plane this way, or we're waiting for something else. So I think it's great to, represent Concordia. We already have other teams that have fee levy, so it's not like it's the first time. I don't think it's even the first time the SAE was a fee levy. Let's just hope that, stays that way.
Thank you. Right.
I just wanted to reflect a little bit on the intent of our regulations to have these groups come forward about a year in advance. And I guess my interpretation of that intention behind the regulation is that council gets a look at exactly what's being asked for, at least a draft of what's being asked for. Not a broad idea, not a verbal proposal, but a presentation of who they are, what they do, what they've done, their numbers, some budgets behind it, some sort of pitch, some sort of documentation to back it up. It's not written in our regulations, so we can't fault the groups for not doing that. I think that shows that, one, we need to change the regulations, and two, perhaps we should be encouraging these groups to come back a little sooner than between now and next year, if they're going to be, if they expect to put this forward next year for actual action.
Yeah, just for clarity, the actual wording is the purpose of such a presentation is only to allow discussion between council and the promoters and to solicit feedback on the proposed question. So, I mean, they can also come and talk about other things.
Feedback on the question would be assuming they presented their question to us. And we can then give feedback on the actual question they're going to be asking students in referendum. So that would be are you asking for enough cents per credit type of things. We can't do that right now.
Just to respond to that, there is a very thorough process of going through policy committee and then council again, so I don't think we really need to worry too much about that. And I do understand that, ideally it'd be within the same council that you would make this information available. But, I had a discussion with Eduardo about this, and I think it is okay because it is a very short time span, and the deadline for by-elections is the Monday after the 15th of September, so that doesn't give you much time to do so.
Thank you. But that being said, council can invite you back, or we can invite you back to when you have a question as well. It's no big deal. Brad?
Yeah, I guess, have you started thinking, it's a year in advance, so it's perfect time for you to start thinking about some of your other funding that you're using right now. How much of it will be recurring, and what you're going to do? I'm assuming a good chunk will be recurring even after, if you successfully get a fee levy. And just just some thoughts about what you think you're going to be doing with that extra funding that you're going to be getting.
Definitely. Well, actually, I gave a presentation to the Chair of Engineering 2 days ago concerning this matter as well. Part of the main premise behind this is to set the precedence by showing what a lot of these societies are doing to contribute towards student learning. I'd like to begin to set that example, but I understand your concern. Just to give you an idea, there's probably half of that number I discussed prior, $135,000, that's easily reoccurring every year. That budget is subjected to the projects that are being developed every year. So a lot of the projects operate on a 2-year cycle where the expenses either see a drastic increase or are stable. So it's the main reasoning behind that is to remain competitive with the other schools, and that requires pushing innovations in terms of manufacturing processes, material selection, improvements in efficiency, and unfortunately that requires a decent amount of budget to improve those aspects, and that's what we're looking to do to continue to have Concordia remain on the competitive scene. Currently, all of our teams that do compete are top 10 Canadian and actually internationally teams as well, so we want to remain like that.
Thank you. Is there anything further? Questions or comments? Yes, Roy?
I would just take the opportunity to invite you back when you have a question for us, and then we can engage in.
Fair enough. I'm all for that. That presentation I gave 2 days ago, I could definitely give it to you guys as well. I do not mind.
Absolutely. All right. Yes, Warren?
That being said, could they or could they not start getting signatures?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They can start getting signatures. It's not contingent on them coming to council. It's just, it's their responsibility to come to council and show the question at some point. So it doesn't say like you need to do this before that in the regs. Okay. All right. Well, in that case, thank you very much for coming and having this chat. All right, folks. Oh my gosh, we don't have any appointments. What is this world coming to? Even for Loyola? Loyola's filled?
Excuse me, yes.
All right, folks. Okay, so at this point we're on 7A, which is CNESST complaint, and it's a closed session point. So I just need a motion to move into closed session. Yes, Rowan. Do we have a second? Margot, any opposition? All right. So I just ask anyone who's not councillor, executive, myself, or the minute keeper to please step out of the room, and we'll call you back in when we go back into open. Thank you. Okay, so we're back in session. So I just need somebody to ratify the minutes of closed. Rowan. Do we have a second? Jane. Is there any opposition to ratifying the minutes of closed? Okay. Rowan and Jane. Yeah. Oh, okay. Sorry. All right. Okay, so at this point we are on point 7B, which is short-term rental marketplaces. And Jane, this one's yours. So if you could just start by reading the motion, please. Sure.
Great, so I'll read out the entirety of the motion. Whereas the use of short-term rental marketplaces has led to the removal of 13,700 units from Montreal's rental marketplace as of 2017, a lack of municipal restrictions has led to a continued decrease in the rental vacancy rate. Whereas the lack of rental units has led to a 5.2% increase in rental costs in 2017-2018, leading Montreal to the rank of the 4th most expensive Canadian rental market. Whereas Concordia University students are directly impacted by the lack of rental properties and the increased financial burden therein. Whereas the CSU has adopted a motion on the 11th of April 2018 against gentrification with the following text. So the text is as follows. Be it resolved that the CSU take a position against gentrification. Be it further resolved that the CSU actively support initiatives working against gentrification and promote community organization working on these issues. Be it further resolved that the CSU help promote anti-gentrification campaigns around Montreal. Be it resolved that the CSU no longer authorize reimbursements for short-term rental marketplaces beginning the 1st June 2019. Be it further resolved that Section 4, funding, paragraph 108, subparagraph F of the CSU standing regulations be amended as follows. So it's the regulation with the added sentence at the end where CSU clubs, notwithstanding travel and lodging expenses, will be reimbursed if the expense was related to the club's mandate. And then the added sentence is, with the exception of lodging leased through short-term rental markets. Be it further resolved that the ethics and sustainability policy of the standing regulations be amended to include the following. Article 7, short-term rental marketplaces. Subparagraph 29, the CSU will continue to actively support initiatives working against gentrification and promote community organizations working on these issues. Subparagraph 30, the CSU shall not lease properties through short-term rental marketplaces such as Airbnb, nor reimburse such purposes. Be it further resolved that the current paragraph 29 under Article 6 shall be moved after this section and renumbered as paragraph 31. So that is the crux of the motion.
So I just need a second. Emmy, your motivation, Jane?
Okay, sorry, it's a little wordy, I apologize. But yeah, so it's fairly straightforward. Short-term rental marketplaces has affected everyone in this room in terms of rental prices. It affects not just Montreal, but every other major city in Canada and across the world even has been affected by these short-term rental marketplaces. And because university students tend to be in a financially precarious situation, they're more at risk of the harm that these short-term rental marketplaces can cause. And that's it.
Thank you. Patrick?
While I like the intent of this motion, has it also been considered that students are also, like, I'm not gonna lie, like a lot of people are of lower income and don't have like a lot of disposable income, because this could, like, especially for clubs, which this would directly impact, has it also been considered that like they're now going to have to be paying more for like short-term rentals? For example, there's the Concordia Diplomatic Affairs. I think they went to Washington, and they raised a lot of money for that. And so that's my question though, is like how like this could also affect clubs for that, like in that sense.
Danielle?
Okay, so I also kind of researched into this, and one, I found that the reason why right now valuations are increasing is because our economy in Montreal is actually booming, which we might see all the time. So that means that the price of the housing market increases, which means renting is going to increase. That being said, vacancy rate, you talked about vacancy rate, which is a really interesting concern. International students are also increasing here. More people are renting properties downtown, so that the supply of it is actually lower than it's ever been before compared to the demand of it, just because there's a massive increase in international students and international people moving to Montreal, which has never been seen before, usually because of the French thing. So that's what I found out in my own research, even though I do agree that there is maybe some problems in like certain areas of Montreal. Recently downtown hasn't been as much affected, and I have a lot of friends in this, so I don't know. I don't see this being something that affects students, all students as a whole. But anyways, that's just my point.
Thank you. John?
Yeah. So in response to Patrick directly, the clubs would be reimbursed for any expenses they make on lodging, whether it's Airbnb or a hotel. So, well, there is the immediate out-of-pocket expense. Keep that in mind that so there will be a larger cost on the club's budget for the year, but on the students themselves, they're getting reimbursed for it. The second piece is that technically Airbnb is already not something we can reimburse for, because Airbnb is active in specifically West Bank settlements. They contravene our BDS policy. So there is already in place, having an explicit position about short-term rental markets on their role in gentrification, so that might be in the interest of council. There technically are already policies in place that would prevent us from reimbursing for Airbnb that were approved by referendum and not just council.
Thank you. Sam?
Yeah, me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So 2 years ago, when we were talking about international student hikes, tuition hikes, there was a statement that was released about the living conditions of international students, and it was revealed that some students are in such low-income situations that they will share studio apartments and will put themselves in vulnerable situations so that they can attend this school. So I do feel that as the union, we should listen to those students and protect them and take this stance against gentrification. It is affecting students. Maybe it's not affecting our friends, but there are people here who are vulnerable, and we need to be there for them.
Thank you. Jean?
So to speak to some of the concerns that Councillor Danielle brought up, so anecdotally speaking, CBC actually released an article last year about a person who lives in a condominium building. He is the only person that actually lives there. Every other single condo in that building is on Airbnb, and this is downtown Montreal. This is only one situation, of course, but like otherwise, I live in the Plateau, and that area is just Airbnb central. Like my very small block where I live that has maybe, I think, 6 other buildings, five apartments on that street have Airbnb listings, just to show how systemic Airbnb is as an issue affecting Montreal students. And yes, maybe it's not affecting, say, Montreal North, but it's affecting areas where students do live and where people are being forced out, where they're being rent-evicted, so that their homes can be turned into Airbnbs.
Sophie? So, I live next to a building that is entirely rent-evicted units for Airbnb, and the unit directly beside my bedroom has a amazing Bose sound system, according to the Airbnb reviews. I live next to a rotating cast of frat boys from upstate New York, tourist families with screaming toddlers, and no one who respects any sort of noise issues. So regardless of the cost of living, just the sheer frustration of having different neighbors who completely disrespect the people who permanently live there for their tourism, for either cannabis, culture, or whatever is very frustrating. And that's before I even get into the lots of research I have done on Airbnb, because it's a topic of a proposal I'm writing right now. Airbnb actually currently is a tiered system, so there are Airbnb units that are more expensive than hotels on the market or hostels on the market. I don't know if anyone's done any extensive traveling, but it's usually far cheaper to get like a $10 a night hostel and bunk with a couple of people than it is to get an Airbnb, and you get the same authentic like travel experience that people are so obsessed with on Instagram. And to just say that like this is incredibly important, because going off what John said with the BDS thing, we already have an anti-gentrification position. Airbnb is exacerbating gentrification. It's not just people moving to Montreal. Airbnb has taken almost 15,000 long-term rental units off the market and turned them into short-term rentals. Short-term rentals thereby create like false lack of housing that jacks up the available units on the market. Proprietors of buildings make more money by essentially rent-evicting, as Jane mentioned, because it is more profitable to rent a condo for $300 a night than it is to rent it for $1,000 a month. So to say that like this doesn't affect students, it absolutely does affect students. It affects me. I am a student. It affects all of you, whether you know it or not, and it affects people on the renting market, but more importantly, the community at large in Montreal. We're not just here to like exist and throw parties or exist and have our clubs do amazing things. That's a super crucial aspect, but we're also here to provide a broader community understanding of our place within the Montreal context. And I think this motion would go so much further into really ensuring that we're putting some bite behind the positions we already have. Airbnb is actually really detrimental in neighborhoods like the Plateau, Ville-Marie, Centre-Sud, Saint-Henri, like all of those key locations, and it's a main factor that's like leading gentrification in our city as well as other cities around the world, from Barcelona, Amsterdam, London, New York, Los Angeles. If you look at any major tourist hub, especially in cities that promote their tourism, this is not only getting that, it's getting the hotel industry and the hotel taxes that could go back into making our public transit system better. So I would strongly motivate the councillors really adopt this, and if anyone has any questions about Airbnb in Montreal, you can read my briefing note that recommends we ban it.
Okay, thank you. James?
Yeah, no, so once again, stuff about kind of organizations like Airbnb. I did some, some digging into where the, the 13,000, figure is, and I did a few kind of, just kind of brief numbers. there's I think about 5% of all apartments in Montreal are vacant, right? So there's nobody there. The 13,000, that's from Airbnb at its height, right? Which I think, I don't think that's just the amount of properties that are listed. Anyway, that accounts for something like 2% of the, so just to kind of see the vacancy rate is about, 2% of all properties in Montreal are that. Now, once again, seems a bit redundant since we already, in the CSU bylaws and the CSU everything, aren't allowed to reimburse people for travel or hotels or anything, and then just say, well, but especially not for Airbnb, I think is a bit, bureaucratically silly, because, I mean, it's already, we can't fund that anyway, so, I mean, even if you're against stuff like Airbnb, which, there are different arguments to be had on that point, especially when it comes to, I'm pretty sure, I would agree that there should be definitely changes to how it operates, especially when it comes to homes that aren't just there for while the family is away in vacation, and the people that do it professionally should probably pay hotel tax because they're turning those buildings into hotels essentially. But to simply talk about a flat-out ban, personally, I think that it's a bit of a redundant motion and a bit too, policy-wise, not the best idea. But anyway.
Sam?
Personal
Yes?
privilege. It's 9 o'clock. We're on point 2. Everyone agrees Airbnb sucks. Can we just keep it to discussion of the motion, please?
All right, thank you. Point taken. Sam?
Yeah, can I motion to vote on it?
They don't understand the point yet.
Technically.
Just nobody
Okay.
say anything and then it will be.
Is there any opposition to calling the question? Yeah, okay, there is. So then no, because it's only been 5 speakers so far.
Okay, then I'll continue.
Okay.
Okay. I think there's nothing wrong with us telling Airbnb to back off. I think unions are used to apply pressure on the economy, and the economy is, the purpose of an economy is to serve us, and right now it's very clear that Airbnb is not serving us. It's making our lives very inconvenient, and I think we should just make this statement as a union to apply pressure to businesses like Airbnb.
Thank you.
My concern as someone who's in a club, and it's not a CSU club, it's a JMSB club, my concern with this is there's a point made that it's okay because students will be reimbursed. Yes, that's true, but there's also the other effects involved, which is that if a club has to pay more for a service, and there were cheaper options available, it then means that it has less money to provide more value for students. So that's my concern with it, is that because you're paying more, now there's less value to provide to students, especially if it's the same kind of service or product that you do previously.
Thank you. Tammy?
Yeah, it's actually, I can answer to that. So, in any case, if you apply to one of the, CSU committees or CSU funding position, you can also ask for certain things. So basically, for example, you have an event that is happening outside the city, and then you're gonna rent the Airbnb for some reason. You can ask for the CSU to pay for food, transportation, and other things, and then ask other source of funding, which, I mean, doesn't say that you should take Airbnb because you shouldn't, but it doesn't change that much, especially if you have different funding sources.
Thank you. Jane?
So just to speak to what one of the councillors said earlier, the reason why there is a for the resolved, with the exception of lodging release to short-term rental markets, is because there's actually a subparagraph that allows clubs to reimburse lodging expenses if it relates to the mandate. So that's why that extra amendment's there. Also, because this is a motion that amends the standing regulations, it's a 2/3 majority vote. So, so people are aware of that.
Thank you. John?
I rescind.
Okay. Eduardo?
Call the question.
Okay, through the second on calling the question. Jared, is there any opposition to calling the question? Okay, so in that case, we vote. All those in favor of calling the question, please raise your placards. 13, 14. 14. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4. 14 out of 8 is 0.77. Okay, yeah, so we have our 2/3.
Question.
Yes?
Can I have mine noted?
Abstention.
No, my, yes, can I have that noted? Is that allowed?
But especially Jared.
Yeah.
Yeah, wait, it was seconded by you.
Yeah, can I also have it noted?
Okay, you can just put it in brackets next. All right, okay, so all those in favor of the motion as read by Jane, please raise your placards. We're voting on the motion now. 10, 11, all those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 11 over 17 is 0.647, so that does not get the requisite 2/3, so the motion fails.
It's possible to ask for a revote.
Yes, we may ask for a revote, if we want to do a recount.
One personal privilege.
Yes.
If this just failed, I think we should move on.
No, we can do a revote, like, just raise your placards again, I can say yes.
Which was counted though, so,
It's,
and like, it was brought up about time before,
okay,
like,
we can vote to do a revote. Like, I don't see a problem with it, but, is there any opposition to doing a revote?
Otherwise, people
Okay.
brought it up, so.
Well, it takes 5 seconds. All those in favor of the motion read by Jane?
Oh,
11, all
what?
those
What?
opposed?
No, wait, sorry. Did you just vote to have a revote?
Okay, folks, a revote was requested and I acquiesced, so we are revoting on the motion for the purpose of getting the numbers. All those in favor of the motion as read by Jane, please raise your placards. 10, all those opposed? 6, and any abstentions. Okay, so it is 10 over 16, not 11 over 16. So it gets 0.625, which is in fact less than last time. All right, so is there any more discussion on this point? Yes, Arad?
I would recommend that you repropose this eventually, but I would love to see more economic data. You've mentioned some stuff. I would love to see it in the whereas and everything.
Can I do a direct response to that?
It wasn't a question.
It was
Also,
not a
try to address the chair of the room.
Oh, yeah, sure,
Yeah,
sure.
no, address one counselor specifically.
Okay, sure.
So, it's just because like there were supporting documents with all that. There was a 20-page doc that I also included. That was a big report about that. Like there was all that information there.
Thank you for clarifying. Sammy, we have a couple minutes before, 3 minutes before we have to move on.
Yeah, I just want to clarify that in the standing regulations, 108.f, the club's lodging expenses are only reimbursed if it is part of their mandate, such as, for example, a conference or such. So it's not just any club can go somewhere and get and come back and just, I just want to clarify that.
Like, in principle, I do support it, but I just had a bit of issues with the clubs part of it, because I don't think there's enough consideration about that, and so, like, it can be reproposed at a later date, and I will support it, but at this point in time, I don't support it, just because we also do have to consider that with clubs, people are actually putting it on their dime, they're not getting the money in advance to, they're paying out of their own pocket, and we're students, and we also need to take that into consideration when we're doing this. Anyways, yeah, so that's pretty much it.
Thank you. Okay, 1 more minute. Kemi?
Yeah, to get back to clubs, I'm actually very disappointed in people of just like, clubs are doing events, which is great, but like we're talking of the livelihood of people. Like I'm living in Hochelaga, I see the gentrification every day, and I see people quitting their apartment that have been here for years because they cannot pay their rent anymore because the gentrification is happening. So I'm actually disappointed, and like it affects students. It affects international students even more. So I'm appalled actually that like we don't want that just because of the possibility that maybe clubs won't be able to have Airbnb.
Okay, so at this point, we have reached time. Is there any interest in adding more time?
And the privilege, regardless of the motion, is the vote, the result is vote. Airbnb is still restricted as to be reimbursed for due to the BDS policy, due to their activities in the occupied West Bank. So go to hotel.
Okay, so at this point, if there's no interest in continuing this, we are on 7C, which is freedom of speech. And James, please begin with the motion.
All right, so I will, as soon as I find this. Chair. As soon as I find the motion. All right. So my motion, well, it's not this motion. That's John's motion. So my motion would be, whereas the freedoms of speech, conscience, expression are foundational, meaning they are by the means by which all other human rights are defended, whereas university campuses are places where all views should be challenged and students, and all students' beliefs should be allowed to evolve and grow through the open exchange of ideas, whereas maximum freedom should be given to students and student groups to express their views, and those rights should be defended by their student representatives. Whereas in 2014, the University of Chicago released a set of guiding principles on the freedom of expression on campus, which have since been adopted and endorsed by many other universities across the United States and Canada to show their commitment to the freedom of expression and freedom of speech on campus. Be it resolved, the Concordia Student Union adopt a new section in its position book called Freedom of Speech. Be it further resolved that the following positions be added under that heading. 1. The Concordia Student Union acknowledges and supports the fundamental right of students and student groups to express their values, ideas, and positions, even if the union and its officers disagree with them. And 2, the Concordia Student Union endorses the Chicago Principles on Freedom of Expression on Campus, outlining the report of the Committee on Freedom of Expression at the University of Chicago in July 2014, which is appended to the documents. The CSU makes a commitment to uphold the Chicago Principles in its everyday interactions with students and student groups. Be it further resolved, the CSU Policy Committee draft a freedom of expression policy in line with the Chicago Principles and present it to Council for approval no later than May 2019, the May 2019 regular meeting for final approval. Now, if
Are you done the motion, sorry?
yeah, that's the motion.
Okay,
There's an
second?
appended document which is the
Yeah. It was sent out in the package.
Yeah, okay.
Seconded by Eduardo. Your motivation, James?
All right, so, look, we're a student organization, and I know that kind of these types of issues have been rather open about, in the past, and I think that, they've been around certain circles especially in the past few weeks. Few years. They've been a rather large, had a large influence. And one of the things that, a lot of places have adopted that I think that we should adopt is the Chicago Principles or the Chicago Statement on Free Expression, which is essentially, a statement, if, I'll get this out right now, a document which outlines the principles that kind of, because of academic freedom and the fundamental right of students to freedom of expression, the university and its representatives and the student union, student union, I'm appending that part because this was released by university. The principle is that we should be defending these rights of students and we should be supporting these students when they wish to express their views. And we should, minimize things like, for example, a heckler's veto, which is one of the, when people essentially start trying to silence other people, right, on campus because they disagree with them, right? And it's not just used on campus; it's used in a lot of places. But kind of these tactics whereby people, try to set, pulling fire alarms, setting places on fire, throwing Molotov cocktails, that sort of stuff.
Not for the motivation, because it counts as motivation.
Right, so, a lot of kind of these principles are kind of absorbed in the Chicago, I think, I'll just find the actual, the quote that I want to reference. A university's fundamental commitment is to the principle that debate or deliberation may not be suppressed because the ideas put forth are thought by some, or even most members of the university community to be offensive, unwise, immoral, or wrong-headed. It is for the individual members of the university community, not as the university, or in our case it would be the student union, as an institution to decide for its members what is acceptable and what isn't, right? And under this kind of aegis, we would be, mandated to basically support the students if, or student groups if they're trying to be suppressed by bad actors, and perhaps, be able to take action against bad actors that want to suppress other people's freedom of speech and freedom of expression, because it's once again, it's foundational. Right? As a corollary to the university's commitment to protect and promote free expression, members of the university community must also act in conformity with the principle of free expression, although members of the university community are free to criticize and contest the views expressed on campus, and to criticize and contest speakers who are invited to express their views. They may not obstruct or otherwise interfere with the freedom of others to express their views, the views they reject or even loathe. To this end, the university has a solemn responsibility not only to promote lively and fearless freedom of debate and deliberation, but also to protect that freedom when others attempt to restrict it. So this is, the principle that we should always be supporting more speech and not less speech, right? And if there's somebody that you don't like, well, set up a counter event, set up a debate, set up something, engage, don't attack. Because if somebody is on, because we can't just ignore these lots of views, because otherwise they're left to simmer, and when they're left to simmer, it's not very, not very good things happen when stuff is pushed underground. And so we have a duty to kind of promote more freedom and not less freedom, and we should be giving the maximum amount of freedom to students. And I think this is what, the context and the principles behind the Chicago principles are, and I think we should adopt, for example, the Chicago principles as a union.
Thank you. Don?
I will be moving an alternative motion on the issue of freedom of speech, because something that I care very deeply about, and everybody drink, something I've been involved in for many years, including at Dalhousie in the battle for academic freedom, for freedom of speech on campus, and academic integrity. There's a paper copy of the motion circulating around. If you haven't gotten it yet, please make sure it's flowing around the circuit so everybody gets to see a copy. In the meantime, I'll be arguing against adoption of this motion because the Chicago Statement is not the best way to support freedom of speech, academic freedom, academic integrity, or the right to organize and protest on campus. First of all, the Chicago Statement is incompatible with the Canadian context and Concordia's own bylaws, not to mention the fact that we are a union and not the university itself that the Chicago Statement is meant to be creating some guidelines for. The Chicago Statement was first drafted in response to a rising tendency of black student activists on campus. And this idea that disruptive protesters cannot be tolerated under the excuse of free speech goes against the entire tradition of university free speech activists, in which so much of the our free speech rights were actually born, notably back in the 60s at University of California, Berkeley. The idea of disruptive protesters challenging authority with the only means they have available, which is not necessarily as the gatekeeper of academic institutions and who gets access to a very limited platform. And then the retaliation by administrators against these protesters is where so much of the free speech movement today was born. What is being described here as the so-called heckler's veto is actually the right to protest and the right to organize. And that is something that anyone who believes in freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, needs to defend vehemently. The idea that only those given the privilege of getting to a platform by the elites of institutions is a very limited take on freedom of speech and should not be endorsed.
Thank you. Margot?
I would just like to say that I do not believe freedom of speech is under attack at Concordia, so therefore I do not support James's motion. Yeah, no, so, when we're talking about things like, for example, a heckler's veto, it's not, this people that are standing up and speaking against the university administration. I know in the modern context of the past, say, 10 years, it's people that go inside the university, organize violent riots outside the university to attack the people inside it. It's people that, throw Molotov cocktails into university buildings in order to get the university to cancel because there's a legitimate fear that people inside the building will get hurt. Like, this isn't people, like, I would support, I think this motion, if we're adopting this, more speech is always better. So if you want to go out there and you want to, protest the administration or protest, certain student movements, not student movements, administration actions, or you want to be kind of loud outside, that's completely fine, right? This is about taking kind of violent actions that threaten the safety of people inside, and I don't think that, that falls within the spirit of free speech, threatening the safety of the people inside just to stop discussion, right? Because stopping discussion, stopping a discussion before a question, is before something is ever even said, doesn't lead to good outcomes, right? And so this is kind of, the principles behind this are more speech is always better than less speech, right? And if you want to go out there and you want to protest, so long as you're not physically threatening anybody, so long as you're not attacking, the building or the people inside the building, or calling in fake bomb threats or fake shooting threats in order to get something silenced, that's, that's a heckler's veto, right? Because you don't.
Yeah, it said 2 minutes.
Anyway, so that's a bit of a.
I must have been sick that day, but when were these Molotov cocktails?
Please.
Point of information.
Did you have was it a question?
Sure.
Yeah, at Berkeley.
Oh, I meant here.
Oh, no, but
So there's none here.
well, not here. It's talking about what the heckler's veto is. So it's, people in Berkeley, like at the University of Berkeley, were throwing Molotov cocktails to stop, speeches.
Follow-up question? Are we in Berkeley?
Okay, all right.
That's
Thank you
not
very
relative
much.
to the principle.
Okay, we get it.
Relevant.
Order, please. Sophie? 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 Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah, you are.
It's too soon to call the question, right?
Yes.
Okay. I will send next.
We're at 6. Kemi?
Yeah, I mean, legally speaking, the Chicago Act is against Canadian law. And which, for better or for worse, we have to follow. And it's also mostly because of the fact that the Chicago Act does not talk about hate speech at all, while the Canadian law does. I think that we have to be very careful when we're talking about freedom of speech those days, mostly because this has been an argument that have been put forward to silence minorities in our society. And it's an important thing to have in a society, but it's even more important that people are able to talk and not be shut down by people that are doing awful comments to them for who they are as people.
Okay, thank you. Margot? Okay, do we have a second for calling the question? Patrick, is there any opposition to calling the question? Okay, so we'll take a vote. All those in favor of calling the question, please raise your placards. 3, Rowan? 3, 4, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. All those opposed? 1, is that an opposition, Sam?
Oh, sorry.
Okay, 1. Right, so that meets the requisite 2/3. So at this point, we'll vote on the motion that James presented. So all those in favor of the motion, please raise your placards. 1. Okay, all those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, so the motion fails, and we have still 7 minutes left to discussion if there's anything. John?
I'd like to move the following motion. Whereas freedom of expression, academic freedom, and academic integrity are essential to the university's mission of teaching, learning, and research. And whereas free speech and academic freedom are rights hard fought for in academia by student activists and faculty unions, and technically academic freedom only legally exists in the form of collective agreements. And whereas free speech has been adopted as a slogan by social conservatives as well as the alt-right for a political agenda seeking to legitimize and or shield from criticism discourses and behaviors which are often racist, homophobic, transphobic, sexist, etc. And whereas high-profile members of the same political tendency, such as Jordan Peterson, have called for defunding entire academic disciplines which they disapprove of, and creating blacklists of professors with views he disagrees with. And whereas, despite the actions of these bad faith actors, defending academic freedom, academic integrity, and free expression remain vital social goals, and whereas genuine threats to academic freedom exist in the form of, but not limited to, 1, increasing control over research agendas by for-profit interests, 2, the increased casualization and precariousness in the academic workforce, causing faculty to be reluctant to be vocal, 3, government threats to operating grants issued to universities which fail to enact policies limiting the right to protest, and whereas genuine threats to freedom of speech and assembly on campus do exist in the form of, but not limited to, 1, government attacks on the stability of student media, 2, parliamentary condemnation against legitimate student organizing, such as, for example, Israel Apartheid Week, 3, the use of blackmail, harassment, and defamation suits made against student activists and bloggers, such as recently the case of Michel DeFranco of the University of Ottawa Free Speech Club, suing a blogger named Michael Buchert, and McGill professor Ahmed Fakhri Ibrahim suing a student professor for speaking out against sexual abuse at McGill campus. 4, the daily systemic barriers faced by BIPOC, women, LGBTQ, disabled, and other marginalized people in having their voices heard or given a platform in the first place. And whereas the right to free speech does not mean the right to on-demand access to publicly funded communications platforms, and challenging who is given access to a platform is a legitimate part of free debate. And whereas the CSU is an independent, democratic organization with a mandate to advocate for positions, which does not require the CSU to provide resources and support to any individual, cause, or group simply because they are students. And whereas because access to platforms is curated by academic institutions, measures against the so-called heckler's veto serve only to protect the gatekeeper's privilege over what may be debated. And whereas the so-called heckler's veto is often the only existing means for marginalized people to be heard in any capacity. And whereas free speech cannot be limitlessly granted to all people and all perspectives equally at all times, because the expression of some views is inherently silencing towards others. For example, in a biology class, if we're going to give free speech to debate the idea of creationism, that's going to suppress actual scientific discussions. So be it resolved that the CSU adopt the following to its positions book on academic freedom, academic integrity, and freedom of expression. 1. The CSU supports unionization of university faculty and staff in order to secure and defend academic freedom as a working condition in their collective agreements. 2. The CSU opposes government austerity and creeping casualization of the academic workforce due to its effects of limiting academic expression via job insecurity. 3. The CSU stands in solidarity with unionized and non-unionized scientists and researchers outside the academy, such as in the federal public service, in advocating for the rights to pursue and speak publicly about their research, for example, climate change. 4. The CSU opposes corporate donations and research contracts with the university in which the donor is given real or perceived decision-making power over what faculty may research and or teach, and how the research may be published. 5. The CSU will seek to elevate the voices of marginalized communities to ensure that the right to freedom of expression is equally held by all in society. 6. That in order to ensure that the right to academic expression is equally held by all, the CSU calls on Concordia to hire, promote, and appoint more faculty who are Black, Indigenous, persons of color, LGBTQ, disabled, women, and or members of other demographic groups which have historically and currently been underrepresented in academia. 7. The CSU supports the right to free assembly and the right to protest and opposes measures which restrict these rights. 8. The CSU affirms that questioning, contesting, and protesting the content of academic, social, and political speech on campus is a vital part of free expression and upholding academic integrity. 9. That the CSU shall reasonably seek to represent a wide variety of student perspectives while affirming that as a democratic, independent organization, the union is not required to endorse or provide resources to individuals, causes, or organizations which do not align with the CSU's positions. And 10, the CSU shall oppose attacks on the right to organize for students, faculty, and staff unions, as well as opposing attacks on student media. Be it further resolved that the CSU donates $500 to the Legal Defense Fund of Michael Buchert, a PhD student at Carleton University, currently being threatened with a defamation lawsuit by Michel DeFranco, who is a member of the executive of the University of Ottawa Students for Free Speech Club, over a blog post he wrote in which Buchert wrote about DeFranco's voluntary association with alt-right figures such as Gavin McGuinness. Be it further resolved that the CSU issue a statement in support of Michael Buchert against the attacks on his free speech made by Michel DeFranco of the U of Ottawa Free Speech Club.
Thank you. Wait a second. Jared, your motivation, it's going to go over time, but then we'll go after that.
I mean, a lot of my comments are already included in the whereas clauses. What it comes down to is that this idea that we have to have a debate on campuses between supporting marginalized communities, combating hate speech and racism and all those bad things, versus having a climate of academic expression and free speech. That is a false binary, okay? That is a political agenda pushed by a small group of people with too much access to columns in newspapers. That is not a real crisis on campus that is taking place in North America or elsewhere. The actual threats to speech and to academic expression and academic freedom, you'll always find power by following the money. And it is in those places you'll find people actually being silenced. The people that are being silenced are notable for being silent. The biggest threats to academic freedom come in the form of things that I have fought for personally through many years as a student activist, yes, at Dalhousie. Things like when Dalhousie signed a contract with Shell Oil in the engineering department so that the mandatory design study for all engineers would have, as a judge, whether you get to pass or fail this project, an industry rep from Shell would have a vote on that committee of the engineers. That's the curriculum for sale. That is a threat to academic freedom. Things like when the government of Nova Scotia passed Bill 100, trying to create these clauses so that universities could declare financial crises and suspend collective bargaining rights on campus, which again is the only place where academic freedom legally exists. There's no law around it, it only exists in union contracts. I fought against that. When the Harper government was shutting down the right to speak for federal scientists talking about climate change, that's where the student movement and the labor movement was, defending those people. And they still are there to this day. That's where we should be now. Things like pharmaceutical research, very notorious for this. When industry-funded research does not produce industry-friendly results, the donor can exert pressure of the institution to maybe put a publication delay on some research, maybe 5, 10 years sometimes. These are the real threats to free expression and academic freedom on campus. This is not, as some pundits would tell you, a bunch of undergrad students that don't like racism. If we want to talk about how to fight for real freedom of expression, that's where to look. So we need comprehensive policies that recognize the threat of creeping casualization and commercialization of research to the detriment of basic research and free expression. We need to affirm that while we definitely do want to make sure that, as a union representing all students, we do make our services available to a wide range of students. Again, we have positions on things like boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and we still fund the Students for Israel Club. But at the end of the day, we are an independent organization, and we have the right to take stances, and we do not have to give our platforms and our resources equally to all. We were able to take stands on things. There have been Supreme Court cases on this issue in the past, notably in BC, when a student union there chose not to give ratification to an anti-abortion club. And the ruling was that student unions are not arbiters of free speech on campus because they're not public institutions, they're private institutions. So we definitely need to strongly uphold the right to protest, advocate for it. Be aware of what's happening in Ontario right now. The government of Ontario is trying to pass new policies, which will jeopardize the funding base of student unions, which criticize the government and the administration, and student media, which do very important work digging up secrets and reporting on them. That's a case of state actors suppressing critics of the state. These are the things we need to be focusing on as a student union engaging in these issues. And that's why I've drafted these policies around them to put our positions for. And I don't want to just make a position and so we can debate it in a room and then leave it until forever. I want to see concrete action based on these positions, which is why we can take action by donating to Michael Bucher's defense fund. He's soliciting it for a GoFundMe right now to defend himself against a lawsuit because the U Ottawa Students for Free Speech Club was heavily lobbied by Doug Ford in drafting the student choice initiative that he created. And these Students for Free Speech are then turning around and threatening defamation lawsuits for thousands of dollars against their critics. And so, if we want to say we want to stand up for free speech and the right to protest and academic freedom and all these things, we should be putting our money where our mouth is and making sure that those actually standing up for both individuals and organizations and institutions pushing for student rights will not be silenced by bullying tactics by people who call themselves Students for Free Speech. So vote yes.
Right, so at this point, we're over time for the agenda point itself. If anyone wants to throw out a number, or if anyone wants to, 5? Do we have a second for 5? No? Okay, so if we're over time, yes, Victoria? Second for 5, okay, is there any opposition to 5? 1, okay, so we have to vote then. All those in favor of extending time by 5 minutes, please raise your placards.
But it's only 5 minutes from just call the question, right?
It hasn't been 8 speakers, but if there's no, if there's no appetite for 5 more minutes, then it has to go to a vote.
Oh, okay, good, so we'll just, yeah.
Okay, so in that case, if there's, okay, well, all 4, all against, 5 minutes. 12, all those, yeah, that's it, 0, 12. Okay, so in that case, the motion fails,
Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out how to turn it on.
All right, so the motion to extend time has failed, so in that case, we proceed to a vote. So all those in favor of the motion as read by John, please raise your placards.
The motion is read by John.
Yeah.
That's what we're voting on.
Yeah. 9, all those opposed? 1, 2, and any abstentions? All right, 9, 2, 3. Yes, you can. All right, so in that case, the agenda point is concluded, and we'll move on to addiction support position. It's been requested as well that the last 2, is everyone okay with bumping the 2 reports to the end, just approving the reports? Is everyone okay with that? Okay, E and F, is everyone okay with bumping those to the end of returning business so we can get some, bigger business out of the way in the end? Okay, so we don't have to break Robert's rules and all that stuff. All right, so at this point, we're on addiction support position, and Michelle, this one's yours.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I can't turn it off now, so we're gonna stick with it. I have a PowerPoint. So the motion, for the positions book, that the Concordia Student Union recognizes the significant barriers and challenges people with addictions encounter to accessing adequate treatment, education, healthcare, housing, freedom from discrimination, and community support. Therefore, the CSU recognizes the distinct needs of students with addictions as a result of these barriers, and that the CSU recognizes the importance of specialized, comprehensive, and peer-based models of support for addictions recovery, and strongly supports the implementation of these services on campus. That's the motion.
All right, do we have a second? Margot, your presentation?
Yes.
Which I will send out as we speak.
Yeah, well, I mean, okay, so yeah, I'll give a, there we go. The report that was sent out yesterday, I understand it was late, which is why I put this presentation together. Virtually everything that is in this presentation can be found in the report that was sent to you and that I encourage you to read. That was beautifully designed by our graphic designers in further detail. So this is just a little overview. So yeah, addictions and recovery on university campuses. So just a few stats on addictions and the student population. So the percentage of people who report drinking at dangerous levels is higher for undergraduate students than the general population aged 18 to 24. 32% of undergraduates report drinking at dangerous levels versus 26%.
1 in 10 undergraduate students reported being victims of alcohol-related sexual harassment, so this also ties into our annual campaign. And importantly, about barriers to access to things like education, people living with addictions have dropout rates of 39% in universities and schools, and those same people that are in recovery have dropout rates of about 3%. So access to treatment is really important for people to be able to continue education and succeed in both their recovery and their jobs and family lives. So, consistent barriers to accessing treatment, community and family participation, stable housing, healthcare, education, and employment have been reported by people living with addictions. A survey by the Canadian Centre on Substance Abuse and Addiction reported 82.5% of respondents face barriers to initiating recovery. So that means things like stigma, access to resources, the financial cost of treatment plans. And 47% identified system-related barriers, so long delays for treatment, lack of professional help for mental health, cost of recovery services, lack of programs or support in their community. A bit of the Concordia context. So there are no specific services at Concordia that address the complex and distinct needs of students in recovery. The Access Center for Students with Disabilities does provide academic accommodations for people with physical disabilities, mental health issues, and that would include also people with addictions. But the problem is that most students are not aware of this. We have counseling services. I think a lot of people are familiar with them. They have incredibly long wait times, and they're not equipped to provide long-term care that is needed for people in recovery and the specific individualized support that is needed. Things like the 10 counseling max sessions is absolutely not adequate for somebody in recovery. And academic, financial, and emotional stress, as well as the university drinking culture, makes maintaining recovery for a student even more challenging. Just some little facts. Unfortunately, these results are from 2013 because Concordia's Health and Wellness Review only had access to those stats from a national survey. But in 2013, 12% of Concordia students reported using non-prescription drugs in the past year. And we also have higher rates of things like cannabis use and drinking, if I'm not incorrect. Our annual undergraduate survey has a few questions on substance use, and Michaela and our survey person are currently working on getting all those stats for us. So how can we move forward to support these students? I'll start by discussing a little bit of the key conclusions of the Concordia Health and Wellbeing Review. So this review was released at the end of 2018. It was done by a committee of people. They relied on interviews, on environmental scans, and on surveys about the general environment around the country. So some of the conclusions that are relevant are that Concordia must shift towards a more community-centric approach towards student well-being. You'll see here that I noted some pages because these are not explicitly in the report that was made. These come directly from the well-being review. So they talk about expanding Concordia's existing health-related services, examining and improving its service delivery models, including things like peer support, campaigns to destigmatize mental health supports and promote healthy behaviors. And they acknowledge that poor well-being, see there's a typo there, that's my fault, that poor well-being affects academic outcomes such as grades. They also talk about creating opportunities to support student research and innovation projects and student health and well-being, and so what I talk about a little bit next will support that. I'm going quite in depth for a position, but I'm just also trying to let the council know a little bit of the work that I've been doing on this to give a bit of context. So, since I started my mandate, this is some stuff that I have campaigned on and that I've been working on throughout the year. We hosted a panel event on addiction and community responses for winter orientation that was really well received by the community. Our academic researcher finished a report titled Addictions Peer Support Programs on University Campuses. That is the report that was sent out to you yesterday. I also attended a conference in Toronto, the Recovery Capital Conference, that talked about more holistic, comprehensive ways of approaching recovery, and also talked about recovery specifically on post-secondary campuses. Since January, our biggest step forward has been creating the Task Force for Students in Recovery. I have been on that task force with now about 6 other people who are either in recovery or who have a personal interest or professional academic interest in these issues. And they've been giving feedback and recommendations. The recommendations of this report were approved by the task force last week. They've gone through the report, made their comments, and approved the recommendations that were made. That letter, which is signed by the task force, was also submitted in the council documents. And the really key thing that we've been working on doing is developing and implementing on-campus peer support resources. That's what the task force felt was the most needed thing on campus, and so that is what we were looking to do. Oh, okay, the format is unbelievable. So really quick, a little bit about these peer support services. We are modeling them on what are called collegiate recovery programs. They exist mainly in the United States. 239 institutions as of 2017 in the States have these programs. These institutions almost always provide peer support. 35% of them provide counseling or clinical support, and 35% of them also offer social activities and sober fun. Most of them will provide a combination of these things. So that's sort of what we're looking at, creating these mutual aid support groups on or near campus that provide physical space for students to gather socially, participate in support groups, receive access to resources. And finally, I'm sorry that this came out like this. The report recommendations, for those of you who didn't get a chance to look at them, would be to develop definitions of peer support for addictions recovery, to provide funding for peer support on campus, create guidelines to support the development of peer support on campus, including training and participant-led organizational development, to implement on-campus peer support services, and that these services be well organized, advertised, accessible, and visible. And that these services be comprehensive, so that means including social activities, discussion groups, counseling, access to external resources. So that is what we are working on right now, and that is the motion. So that was my motivation.
Okay, thank you. Is there any discussion about the motion? Okay, so if not, we can move to, yes. Okay, if not, we can move to a vote. So all those in favor of the motion, please raise your placards. All those opposed? 0. Okay, yes, Eduardo?
Motion for a 10-minute recess.
Okay, we have motion for a 10-minute recess. Is there a second? Lee, is everyone amenable to 10 minutes? Okay, so we'll be back here at 9:53. All right, folks, it's time to reconvene. I'm just going to give the floor to one counselor and then to the counselor who has this agenda point first. Arad, did you just have something you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, so for a couple of motions now, I just got cut off right before I got to make this point. But I just want to call all the counselors and executives and I guess everybody in this room to just remember that we're all students and we should all maintain respect whether we enjoy or dislike the topic at hand and the proposals made and the claims made. Whether they're ridiculous or not, we're still students, and I think the CSU as a whole have a problem when it comes to our culture. So let's keep this in mind while they present something that obviously we all have a certain opinion on, and we want to maintain neutrality and just listen to them and remember we're students. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Sam, this agenda point, well, it's kind of attributed to 4 different people, but if one of you could start out by reading the motion.
Just point of personal privilege.
Yep.
Are we blocking the projector?
No.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
I can read it.
Okay. Yeah, just so we have it read out and convenient debate and all that.
Yeah. So question 1 doesn't mention silk. Do Do you agree to pay 35 cents per credit indexed to inflation in accordance with the Consumer Price Index of Canada towards the establishment of a Solidarity Economy Incubator as proposed by C's effective fall 2019?
Right, we have a second? The motion is to send it to referendum, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, can you just repeat can you just say, I move to send this to referendum?
I move to send this to referendum.
Okay, do we have a second? Eliza, and your motivation, or you want to give the floor to the people here to present?
Just
Go ahead.
Oh,
point
Eduardo,
of
too?
information.
Yeah.
So we're only discussing this question now, and then we're going to discuss the second one, or?
It's only
There's only
question
one
one.
question.
Yeah.
So there's only one question,
Yeah.
it's still funny one.
Yeah.
Of sending that to referendum.
Yeah.
And we've seen a couple presentations, so if you could just try to bring up new things, that'd be great. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks for the floor, everyone. My name's Olivia. I was here a while ago, but yeah, so we're presenting the Solidarity Economy Incubator Zone. So it's a campaign to create an incubator for students at Concordia. The Incubator is an organization that helps entrepreneurs develop their businesses. This is accomplished through courses, workshops, internships, placements, professional mentorship, networking, funding, and business plan development. So CESE is proposing to create an incubator through a fee levy system at Concordia so the students can decide whether or not they want to pay 35 cents per credit towards the incubator's operating expenses. CESE is currently running our curriculum series, which is the Fundamentals of the Solidarity Economy, which is one of the courses we hope to continue to operate through the incubator, among many more. We will also be collaborating with other cooperative organizations in Montreal to host a film screening, Silence Transformation, on March 22nd, on the rise of the cooperative model. The core members of CESE are launching a new cooperative, Bangui Solidarity Cooperative Cafe, or completing the transition of existing companies into cooperatives, Tree Amigos, workers' cooperatives. So the coordinating team does have a lot of experience with cooperatives. Here's the first cohort that completed the workshop series that is now in our second time. So what is the council voting on tonight? Council is voting whether or not Concordia undergrads as a whole will be able to vote on the following question in the 2019 general elections. And this is repeating the motion that was mentioned before. Do you agree to pay 35 cents per credit indexed to inflation in accordance with the Consumer Price Index of Canada towards the establishment of a Solidarity Economy Incubator as proposed by CESE effective fall 19? Why should you vote yes on this question being sent to ballot? The CESE campaign followed all CSU procedures on the matter for reference. These include standing regulations 247 to 255 and bylaws 9.61 and 9.62. CESE collected over 900 signatures from students who directly supported our campaign and to putting this question to ballot. CESE worked with the CSU Policy Committee for a period of approximately 1.5 months to assure our proposal was thorough and consistent, resulting in a unanimous recommendation for approval from the committee to council. Students voted on the CSU supporting a Solidarity Economy Incubator in the previous referendum with over 84% voting in favor. So what has happened since the last council meeting? Several student groups have publicly encouraged the CSU to reverse its decision and send the CESE referendum ballot to question. These include the Hive, SASU, and SAF. Why are we doing this? So we've had a lot of tremendous support from individuals, as you can see by a lot of students who have spent their evenings here watching this council meeting behind you. And here's some pictures of some people. So why are we doing this? CESE wants to fund an incubator so that we can transition our economy into one that serves the interests of the people over profit. Council should allow for this conversation to happen at the student level body in the form of a campaign on a referendum question. We encourage the CSU Council to respect the union's regulations on the matter and allow the student body to decide. Finally, we ask that those councillors that have disagreements with our campaign, whether they be differences of value or nuanced critiques of our proposal, express those through the referendum period of the CSU as opposed to shutting down the campaign. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. John?
Yes, just so folks are aware, CESE collected petitions for 2 separate referendum questions, and one of them was submitted to the policy committee for review. That's the one voting on tape, is up in front of you on the screen. The other question which they collected petition signatures for reads as follows. Do you agree the CSU be mandated to amend Special Bylaw 1 to affect the collection of the Student Space, Accessible Education, and Legal Contingency Fund fee levy so that it be lowered by a total of 35 cents per credit in the interest of ensuring the CESA's initiative's Incubator fee levy will not pose a net increase to student fees. Now that was not submitted to Policy Committee and is not being voted on tonight. And based on conversations I had with member of C's Marcus Peters today, is because their interpretation of the wording of this motion is such that rather than if that were to go to referendum, it would by itself reduce the Silk Fund fee levy. It would rather mandate CSU in the next round of by-elections to put a question referendum on reducing the Silk Fund fee levy by 35 cents. So that an event like here tonight where council is voting on whether or not such a question, we really wouldn't have a choice because the referendum mandate says we have to vote on this later. That is what the interpretation of this wording was explained to me as being by a member of C's, Marcus Peters. And so they intend to not go through council, they don't believe they need it. They'll be giving it to the CEO for him alone to decide whether it would go to referendum or not. So I guess my question to other folks that see if you want to answer this is, if council votes in favor of the question here, will there also be a referendum taking place about the possibility of eliminating 35 cents from the Silk Fund fee levy either now or in the next round of by-elections, which would have the effect of bringing the Silk Fund fee levy down to from 38 cents, where it is going to be as of the start of the summer, down by 35 cents, of which the remaining 4 cents has to go to the DISH project, reducing the Silk Fund's fee levy to negative 1 cent per credit. If we vote yes to this motion, are you going to put the other question to the CEO for referendum and jeopardize the continued fee levy of the Silk Fund? Please answer that question.
So the intent of the campaign was always to run 2 referendum questions. However, there has been a lot of discussion around the second referendum question. As per the CSU's regulations regarding a question that does not involve a CSU fee, it does not need the approval of council, which is why it was not a matter for discussion at this moment. And so with the members of the campaign, we are open to having a dialogue with the Chief Elections Officer in order to amend that motion so that we can remove certain elements of that question if that is more consistent with the views of this council. That is something that we are willing to do. But as it stands now, we've collected 870 signatures on that petition. It was submitted a few weeks ago, and that's always been our intent. However, I would like to say that the discussion at this meeting, we're hoping, as was presented by Olivia, will be around the approval of this referendum question and whether or not that goes to ballot.
All right, thank you. James?
Yeah, so kind of to, just about kind of what this, about kind of what we're going to be voting on right now. We're going to be voting on whether or not we should give a green light to this group to become a fee levy, essentially, right? That this group has a green light for council, and I want to enumerate something that happened over policy committee that I believe is being misrepresented.
Just to clarify, the question is to put it to ballot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was decided in policy committee was that in theory, this organization could exist and run itself. That's about it. Nothing about the mission, nothing about what they do, nothing about, you know, is this a wise use of student money? Nothing that. Just, is this organization technically, do the bylaws allow for it to exist in a okay manner? Like, it doesn't have to be great, just it's a bare minimum standard. Right, and something that I want to kind of point out is that during these meetings, lots of issues were brought up about their budget, about whether or not this is a wise use of student money, whether or not a lot of stuff happened. They were deemed not relevant to the vote, right? And I abstained because of my personal convictions that were against this group. Now, something else that I want to mention is that they're going to be collecting a $250,000 fee levy if this passes. This passes the referendum. of that $250,000, 60,000 will be going to various partnerships, with the largest amount that they will be able to give to any single group, $16,000 in their proposed budget as one of the partnership categories, with $16,000. They're paying their executives and their staff more money than they will be giving to any individual group. And that money that they will be using on their own upkeep will constitute 75% of their budget. Now, if we want to, give this thing a green light, that's our decision here. We are voting on whether or not to give this organization a green light. And personally, if we want to fund stuff like co-ops, I think it's a better idea to ask for funding directly to support them as individual fee levies, instead of giving money to an outside group that's going to become a third party once it becomes a fee levy. And after it's a third party, council has no say at all, no control, and no right to find out how they're using their money, unless of course, unless of course people go to their annual general meetings where they might be making those decisions, right? So we're going to be left in the dark about this money. We won't know who it's going to. And I don't think it should be greenlit essentially by council.
It's 2 minutes now. Jean?
Right, so I just have one question and a follow-up. Are there any SASU execs present right now? Yes. So, great, so I just have a question for the, YouTube, I guess. You wrote a letter advocating for Cs. I assume that you know the organization intimately well in terms of their bylaws, in terms of their budgets. I'm wondering if you could elaborate a bit on the operational costs that Cs has. So why each amount is allocated to each budget line? Just tell me something.
We're not familiar with the exact budget, but the purpose of the letter was more to show that we thought that council had voted in their personal beliefs, and we thought that the students should actually have the right to vote for it, because 900 students did ask for it to ballot. And when we were at the last meeting, at last council, we felt like it was a lot of personal values and beliefs that were that. So that letter was mostly just in regards to let the students decide what they want to do with their money.
And Paul?
But you have seen the budget, right? You have read over the bylaws.
Slightly.
Okay.
Thank you. Will?
Yeah, so I've got a couple points. First, there's a lot of discussion around what we're voting on. Yes, we're voting on question 1. As a board of directors, when we make decisions, we have to take in the relevant context. In this situation, the relevant context includes the fact that on the table is us having one of our fee levies put at -1 cent. That is very relevant, and it very really impacts us. So that's something that we need to consider in this room. It's our legal obligation as people with fiduciary responsibility to the organization. Furthermore, as going off of John's point, this puts the organization in a very problematic position. We just lowered the Silk Fund 35 cents in January, and this wasn't done with consultation of the CSU. So if that's dropped, I'm open to this. If it's just question 1 that's being put to ballot and that's written into our motion, great. Otherwise, I'm against it, because I'm against something that limits our ability to use our Silk Fund, to do projects, to defend ourselves legally. There's been talk about the interest that's accrued. Yes, it accrues a decent amount of interest, but not enough to actually renew itself. Not enough that if we spend $1 million, we'd have to wait, 2 years to get that much money back without spending the Silk Fund? That's dangerous for the organization. That's dangerous for the union, which is responsible for representing 35,000 students, and we have fiduciary responsibility to protect.
Thank you. Margot?
Question to all of the members of C's here. I think it's very clear that we're totally down to give this the green light if you want to write into the motion that this will not be used to bankrupt the legal contingency fund. I want to know how like people other than Marcus Peters feel about this, because thank you, Marcus, you've spoken a lot in this room. But like everyone else who's here, like would you be down for that? Like promising that you're not going to come for the union's legal contingency fund, and then you can just run your fee levy. Yeah, or I assume you guys have discussed this before, like I assume this has been talked about because it's fundamental to what you're running on. So like, thoughts?
Anyone can respond or wants to respond?
If that's contingent on the motion passing, I would say that's the way it should go.
Are we allowed to propose amendments to the motion?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that amenable to you folks?
I think they're a bit confused, so they think I'm like.
Yeah. So what I'm proposing is that written into the motion is like a stipulation that like this money will not ever be taken out of the legal contingency fund, which would be a little bit confusing for students, but also it seems necessary considering the non-answer that was given before about whether or not that would happen in the future.
Thank you. Sophie?
So, yeah, on October 24th, Marcus and I believe Olivia as well came to council at Loyola, and you brought up the question regarding silk. And at that time, I challenged whether or not it was within the bylaws of the union for that referendum question to go, as bylaw 9.61 states, any petition concerning the introduction or change of a fee levy must, in addition to receiving the respective amount of signatures, follow the dispositions of these bylaws and CSU standing regulations. Pursuant to that, 11.2 states, the student union fee shall be set by referendum, notwithstanding bylaw 9.6, the Council of Representatives shall have the sole authority to propose the amount of the fee. At that time, I was challenged in saying that the silk fund was part of the student union fee under special bylaw I. So just to clarify for everyone in the room, special bylaw I reads, the membership fees payable by members of the Concordia Student Union pursuant to section 11.1 of the general bylaws and the act respecting the accreditation and financing of students' associations, brackets, Quebec, end bracket, are the following: CSU operating fee, CSU advocacy center, CSU housing and job bank, CSU legal information clinic, CSU clubs, student space, accessible education, legal contingency fund, silk, in brackets. So, pursuant to that, how is it that the chief electoral officer says whether or not this proposed change to the silk fund gets to go to referendum when it is clear that Council of Representatives has not decided the amount within that question? And to echo what has also been said, given that, are you amenable to simply having your own fee levy and leaving the CSU's legal contingency fund without a negative $0.01 per credit fee levy?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Was that a question or rhetorical?
Yeah, that was a question.
Okay.
I'd like to respond to just a number of points. So firstly,
Point of personal privilege, I hear a lot of, okay, well,
It's done.
I heard someone on the phone, I think we should close the door, that's all.
Thank you.
right. So yeah, firstly, as I said in my first statement here, we are amenable to having that referendum question changed. So just to answer one of those questions, the CEO, based on, I believe it's the bylaws, perhaps it's the standing regulations, has the final authority on the wording of referendum questions to ensure that they are value-free, etc. So that's where that's coming from. We recognize that the CEO has authority on that. When it comes to the amendment of any union fee, that is the sole authority of council. We completely agree. And as I said in that meeting on October 24th, I would draw your attention to the word mandate, which can be found in that motion. So the second referendum question would actually mandate council to have that carried out, and it would require still another referendum question after that to actually come into effect. So that's where that's coming from. Just as another point, SEAS has been well, not under the name SEAS, but the efforts to create a solidarity economy incubator have existed on campus for several years. A lot of this started when a referendum question was passed by the student body, In that referendum question, it specifically asks that the union employ its resources, including a portion of the Silk Fund, towards the creation of an incubator. So the second referendum question is following in the spirit of that. I found it problematic to ask that council act as the gatekeepers on this question by ensuring an amendment to the motion that goes against a mandate that's voted on by the membership. Nevertheless, there's been discussion both within core members of Cs as well as outside about amending that second referendum question. And we can have a discussion on that if necessary. I believe, people have various opinions on it, and that's a good place. I suppose this is as good a place as any to have that discussion.
Follow-up question? Thank you. Yeah. Given that you're proposing a mandate that would restrict the sole authority of the CSU Council of Representatives to decide the amount of the student union fee as stipulated in the bylaws by this referendum, and given that in this meeting it's been shown that this mandate would, in essence, create a negative fee levy for our student space accessible education and legal contingency fund, if it's already been mandated that a portion of the Silk Fund goes towards a student space incubator, why is it so important that you mandate a specific referendum to take away the sole authority of the Council of Representatives in deciding the student union fee if it's already been decided on? Did you want to?
So two responses to that. Firstly, again, a lot of this was coming from the original referendum mandate that passed through the union, which was mentioned in the presentation. But secondly, this started in October. This referendum question process started on October 24th, where we brought it to council's attention that this was something that we were intending on doing. This was prior to the CSU Council adopting your own referendum question to go to ballot to reduce the Silk Fund fee by almost exactly the same amount. Had that been a part of the conversation during this consultation that we had with you in October, then we likely would have changed this motion, but then we end up collecting petition signatures and finding out that you put almost the exact same motion as we presented to ballot. So that is why.
Point of personal privilege, it was raised at that meeting that this was the sole authority of council, and it was also equally ignored by the presenters at that time. So just a little rehash, there are a lot of new councilors in the room who weren't here for that. It is extremely frustrating to repeat myself and the bylaws of an organization I represent, and then be told that the actions that the organization took within its own authority was in contravention with a proposal that at that time was mentioned to the presenters went against the sole authority in these bylaws. Thank you. Sophie?
I was saying.
Okay. Chris?
Yeah, so this is just me being honest. I held back last council meeting because I see you really care about what you're doing, and it seems like a lot of people care about it a lot, and I don't want to hurt a project, but I just have to ask it. I just got to be straightforward. I don't understand what C's really is. I just hear a lot of words, like Solidarity Incubator. That sounds like a great idea, but I don't understand exactly how you're going to get to that goal. I feel like it's very muddy the way it's described, like you're going to figure it out later. So what I want to ask is, what is C's?
So the main programming is through offering the courses. So there's going to be Solidarity Economy 101, 201, 301, and that'll run every semester. So it's giving alternative business and economic information to students, alternative to what we're taught at Concordia. So because we are a service provider, a large part of the operating budget goes to labor. So a bulk of it goes to education, and then the other bulk goes into mentorship for incubation services, which involves if you want to start a business, you need a business plan, you need help with finances, you need to be connected to funders, and these are all resources that, as someone who's started a cooperative, are not in one place. So it takes a long time to find all these resources. You have to knock on 20 doors to get all this information, and in English is very difficult. So what CES is going to be doing is having all the information in one place, and while also giving alternative education for folks to be informed about the different business models that they can make for their entrepreneurial dreams.
Thank you. Rory?
Okay, I have a couple points. One, I guess the theme of my comments are that I find this has been a process done in bad faith. To start with, what Sophie just said, all of what's happened since October and what happened in October goes to show some bad faith here. Secondly, this point was brought back on the agenda tonight based on a letter signed by a couple councillors saying that CSU Council didn't vet this project in good faith, and that's completely incorrect, as explained previously by Sophie. Furthermore, what I've observed, even just being in the room today, are words like, and I will quote, contingent on this motion passing, when referring to the other referendum question. So that was in response to a question that Margot had asked. And I've also heard language like, it's open to change, we'll talk to the CEO about it. What I've heard is that we are being held hostage by Cs on the other referendum question based on how we vote on this one. And that to me is disgusting. So, like, I'm against it just from that. Next, you say that the fee levy is to be indexed to inflation, which is about 2.6% on average. But yet, in all of your budget documents, you have 5% salary increases for all of your staff every year. Their salaries go up 5%. That's unheard of. Not to mention the fact that that just seems like eventually you will run out of money. Fee levy's going up 2.5, 2.6, you're paying people 5. 5 more every year. We did give you money in the past. We had an external and mobilizations committee from 2017 that gave you $1,500 approximately, and then maybe another $2,000. So it's not like we haven't supported this initiative after students said they wanted it. I also have concerns about the letter from SASU that was written in support of Cs. And what I'm concerned about is that Marcus is a member of SASU. And the letter from SASU is not signed by all of the executives. So I have no way of knowing, looking at this letter of support from one of our Concordia student groups, from one of our community members, our stakeholders, that that letter isn't just a complete sham of one individual on SASU is writing something that represents their views as a group that's also involved in this. So it just seems like there's a lot of bad faith going on in this process. And I think that the 2 different fee levy questions, 2 different referendum questions is procedurally expedient for you, but is politically manipulative and extortive to us. And that's where we have an obligation to step in and say, no, that's not how you're supposed to do things. That's not in the best interest of students, and it's not in the best interest of the organization.
2 minutes.
That's, yeah, we're good.
Okay. So first of all, like, the question is here, like, we're being asked question 1. I think we should focus on question 1. I don't think the situation is disgusting. There's nothing manipulative about people voting to support a project. And I just want to say, like, there's people here who have taken the time to actually learn about what Cs is. The reason that we brought it back is that it was in bad faith. We spent a lot of time scrutinizing them for unfair reasons, and this is why we're bringing it back, because we just want to show that there are people here who support it. We have all these students who are here. We have the signatures, the hundreds of signatures. The thing is that, like, if you wanted this to be, if you cared about the students and you wanted this to work, you would have been, like, in communication with C's, like, fixing this, you know? Like, you would have, like, been more participating, but right now you're, like, bringing it up right now, trying to shoot them down. I just want to say, like, there's a lot of people who care about this, and you're basically telling them, no, I don't really like the idea. And it's like, okay, but these people are some of the most qualified people to do this. The Solidarity Incubator is something that does not exist in Canada yet. Concordia would be a leader in Solidarity Incubator creation. And the thing is, like, if you look at their track record and the things that they're doing, as was presented in the PowerPoint, they're very qualified to do this. And there's some counselors who haven't spoken up, but, like, there's some counselors who have gone to their classes and, like, really benefited a lot from those classes. Like, this is a very legit program, and I find it unfair that we're framing it in such a harsh way. it's not okay, and students are disappointed by that. And students are disappointed by counselors who are not taking the time to understand how important this is.
Thank you. Eduardo?
Firstly, I would just want to say, I think, sorry, I'm just gonna skip that. From what you guys are offering, it seems to be basically like a classroom, a class. It's a school to teach people how to run businesses, which I think is good. What I do question is why you need so much money for a school, because especially from, I'm calling back all the way to the January meeting, where you were discussing, I believe it was Drew discussing, I believe it was Drew discussing it, that the classes aren't that many. So I would just wonder again, why do you need so much money for what I feel is a little limited in what you're giving back?
So I think that what we are presenting and what we're hoping to accomplish is, it's fair to say that it's ambitious in the sense that we want to create an organization that's going to facilitate wide economic change. And in order to accomplish this, we've been following, again, all procedures and operating via the membership via referendum, which is why our current campaign includes a total of 3 referendum questions. So we do recognize that it's ambitious, but nevertheless feel that these numbers correspond to the level of seriousness we have in accomplishing this. If we are serious about trying to create an engine for economic change that's going to teach people how to develop successful cooperative and nonprofit business models, we need to have professionals on hand and within the staff at all times who are able to help facilitate this process. So that number was a point of ongoing discussion with C's, with the core group while we were forming our budget, constitution, and bylaws for a period of several months. That's the number that we came up with. And it's also the number that was discussed in policy committee. And just as one further comment, I think that it's incredible, some of the comments that were made by previous counselors, to suggest that by operating via the membership and by attempting to launch a campaign via referendum, we are somehow holding this representative body hostage. I think that is an incredible statement to make.
Yeah, on that note, if we could avoid the extortion and hostage-taking rhetoric, that would be excellent, because those are crimes. Arad.
Okay, so question to council and execs first. Members of CEAS have mentioned the illegitimacy of our roles as gatekeepers. And by gatekeeper, I've understood that they mean having any ability to vote down bringing a question to ballot when it has student support. That is my understanding. And my understanding of our responsibilities as counselors is to filter out illegitimate projects, which this is not, but also projects that we feel would not enhance student life. And so before I proceed, am I correct on this matter, on this premise?
Yes.
All right, thank you. So given this, an appropriate evaluation, in my opinion, ensures that this project has A, student demand, I think this is met, especially with the past referendum, B, operational capacity, any success stories that we've seen in the past. I've not seen much, and honestly their website doesn't even show much for me to see, but I'd allow them to elaborate in the after this. And finally, financial capacity, and so this for me is my belief in the team's ability to sustain themselves and to not be, quite frankly, a cash grab for personal salaries, especially given Mr. Peters' 17.4% salary increase in 2 years. So, I would be open to a different form of funding where we can maintain accountability and ensure project success. At the end of the day, what I want to give students, and what students want, is a co-op incubator, but I also want to make sure that we're ensuring project success without wasting student funds. So I think that's an important discussion point to bring forth. I'm not opposed to providing funding. I know students want this. I'm not convinced that you're able to do this in good faith.
Marcus, you're next on speakers list.
Okay, just a general question for council, because the issue of salaries, positions, and these sorts of things, and our ability to fulfill our mandate has been brought up several times. So the CSU, for example, is, it's a union organization that's meant to represent and uphold the values of students. It also operates with, I believe, around 30 staff members. And similar to that we have a general coordinator position within Cs, the CSU also has a general manager. I'm curious if any of the counselors or executives can make a comment as to how much you pay your general manager, for reference.
Our general manager is a certified CPA and MBA, so his compensation would be much higher than someone like yourself.
And also confidential.
I can comment on the general coordinator makes less money than what C's would make though. C's general coordinator would make more money than the CSU general coordinator. I mean, we're all paid the same as executives, but.
No, sorry, I said general manager.
I know, but
understand
we're
that.
making an equivalent, that's all.
And we cannot tell you legally the exact salary of an individual we have on staff according to the privacy law. What I can tell you, and I will personally disclose this, is my salary is $34,074 before tax, which is just slightly above the living wage. Thank you.
Right.
Also,
Can I just make a comment that there's been a lot of talk of, Marcus taking this position, and I just want to say that that is not the intent of any of the organizing team of Cs, that there will be a call out and a professional hiring process, and we will not have conflict of interest with these positions.
Also, as I said in the previous meeting, I have no intention of having a salaried position with Cs. I am saying that publicly twice now.
Thank you. Jane?
Great, so I have an amendment. So I sent the text to you, and I'll just read it. So it's just the motion that's presented, which is to pay 35 cents, blah, blah, as proposed by C's. And then the amended part is contingent on no amount of the fee levy be taken from the Silk Fund, and amendment, and then effective fall 2019. So.
Oh, I just need a second. Yeah, the amendment is to add at the end, contingent on no amount of the fee levy be taken from the Silk Fund, effective fall 2019.
I don't know if that makes grammatical sense.
It may not.
I agree with the sentiment, but if we're gonna send it up to all the students, I would love. Wait, let me just.
Parliamentary inquiry.
Yes.
Can we just verify that this motion would be legal? Because there's a couple people have concerns about its applicability or its enforceability as a legal motion.
Okay.
The sentiment's there, but it's just, it may not hold.
Okay. Well, okay, first it needs a second, then we can reword it.
Well, we don't know to second it if it's not procedurally correct. So that's
I
why
mean, based on, based on what? Like, based on what do you?
Like, it's not worded in a way that it can be enforced in future.
By entering into the session and then further amendment, that was actually starting that dialogue is the first step.
If it's, here, let me post it. It says, do you agree to pay 35 cents per credit indexed to inflation in accordance with the Consumer Price Index of Canada towards the establishment of Cs? That was already there, effective fall 2019. Basically, the effective fall 2019 should be before the contingent on no amount, and then it makes grammatical sense. Is there any other basis for which it wouldn't be enforceable?
When is it completed?
Yeah, I'm gonna post it in the group, if that is possible right now. Apparently
One of
things
our
aren't working.
speakers has a question or comment?
Yeah, regardless of it being enforceable or not, if that is the intention of the committee then, or the council, then we will not act in bad faith against that, regardless of its enforceability.
Well, okay, so here, let me post it. The way that it is currently, oh, hey, it posted with the agenda, because why not?
I know personal purpose.
Yes.
Just for like ensuring accountability sake, could we just make sure that Olivia's statement was noted in the minute, please? Thank you.
I'll just do like a big thing.
Yes.
How much time is there
Good question. 23:56. Oh, we've gone over by a few minutes in that case. So we'd have to vote.
By another half an hour.
Okay, so motion to extend the agenda point? Okay, so motion to extend the agenda point for another half an hour. Is there any opposition? Yes?
Does, if we do not extend it now, does it mean we're voting on ceases to send it to referendum?
I mean, basically,
Yes. Okay.
Okay, so there's a motion on the table to extend by another half an hour. Is there a second? Sophie? Okay, all those in favor of extending for another half an hour? 15, all those opposed? 1.
0.
Opposed? 1? Okay, and abstentions. Okay, so in that case, it will be 23:08 is time.
Point of information?
Yes.
Would anyone like to second this so we can actually?
Yeah. It's grammatically correct. Chris, second. Do you want to motivate?
Yes. So first thing, the reason why I say the Silk Fund fee levy is just because I do believe that if ever cities wanted to motion for some funds to be taken out of the Silk Fund to support cities, that's doable, it's understandable, it's actually something that the Concordia student body has voted on and are okay with. I just am really not okay with any amount coming from the Silk fee levy, just because right now it's like the entirety of the fee levy for Silk, and the motion was a portion of the Silk Fund. And the original motion that was passed back in 2015 didn't mention the fee levy, it only mentioned a portion of, and last I checked, the entirety of a fee levy isn't a fraction.
Thank you. Okay, so starting your speakers list, Sophie?
I would just like to point out that I guess my personal problem with the way student support for this fee levy group was obtained was not done in, did not follow like a full transparency, because the bylaws of Cs and the budget are not available for students to see on their website. Actually, I found that the website does not really provide much information, and I'm personally like super for social economy and an incubator. It seems that there's a lot of components that are not made accessible to the student whom you're asking a signature from. And for me, that is a problem, because it pertains to their membership and their access to that service. And like, if you only look at the website, it looks really, you know, a great service for students and a great initiative. But then when you dive deeper and you get the document that were provided to council, it seems like this information is not available to any students or association that would support this project. And also, another councillor pointed out SASU's support for this a letter of support, but I would also like to mention that Olivia is also a member of staff, and so like the student association that supported, the 3 student association that supported Cs publicly, all contain members of Cs, so we should just consider this as, and just ask why there was no other fee levy groups or other student association that came forward in support of this, even if they were asked to also support this project.
Okay, just to bring it back a little bit, right now we're only talking about the amendment, so it's what Jane proposed. So yeah, the last part being tacked on, contingent on no amount of the fee levy be taken from the Silk Fund. So that's just the topic of discussion right now. Patrick?
Yeah, so this amendment is actually unenforceable because the CSU cannot control actions of an independent organization or independent, well, students, because that's just actually impossible. And yeah, so like, I honestly don't trust this whatsoever, and yeah, it could be, we could amend this, but like, this is just a promise. It's not enforceable, there's no contract, there's nothing here. So yeah, I suggest we just vote this down and we actually decide if we want to bring this to referendum or not.
Who has the express authority to decide the amount of the Silk Fund fee levy?
Council?
Okay, so is this amendment enforceable then?
No. But I mean, it's not against the bylaws either.
So, yeah, okay, thanks.
Thank you. Rory?
It's also just a concern of, like, this that we're voting on is the motion from C's, do you approve 30,000 as a credit? Like contingent on it not coming from the silk fund, putting that in the referendum question doesn't do anything. Like students, one, don't understand that context or that maybe those finer details, and it's also, we should be making a motion to allow the referendum question contingent on not taking money from silk, not change the referendum question with a contingency to not take money from silk. So in my opinion, that's an issue with its legality as well, in addition to what's already been pointed out.
Sam?
Well, in terms of just accountability, I do want to note that like they made a statement that they will not take that on, right? Anyway, so I just want to say like if your point is going to be that, oh, like they might do it, like no, they're saying it right now, they're not. So this isn't a point anymore.
John?
Well, this is prefaced by the fact that I'm not a hater of C's. Concordia is unique amongst most universities in all of Canada in the density of number of cooperatives on campus. And the CSU itself has been doing really cool projects that are getting national attention, like the Wood Note as one example. So, like the solidarity economy and cooperatives is really a signature of the CSU. And we should be supporting groups like C's that want to expand on this record of success. Which is why it's really upsetting to me that I have to take this position and argue against what they need to get to what they want to get, because yes, we do need to absolutely put a lot of weight and respect behind democratic will of students, but we also have a fiduciary duty as members of the board of directors of the organization, and they're making us choose between respecting the will of students and making profoundly unwise financial decisions. This idea of making it a little bit easier to sell the fee levy by reducing the fee levy to another organization which is not them was a choice. It was optional at every step. It was an unnecessary enemy made. If you were just making the case, we want to create a fee levy, think about how much easier this would have been. Why is it necessary that the Silk Fund has to go down in order to make you have the success as a group? Is it that much harder to run a referendum without having to take away our levy? And I would like that question answered by someone who's not Marcus Peters, purely on the grounds that we've talked about this a lot today. Nothing shady, I just want to hear from somebody else. Why is taking away the Silk Fund levy the hill you're going to die on?
Yeah, sure. I don't think it's necessary for C's to function. I think there's a lot of merit and value in the proposition that we're making, and I don't think that it should be a point that it dies on. Specifically, to be honest, if you want to know why that was approved, well, initially, when this was all being thought of, it was 75 cents as a full credit, not 35 cents. So it made sense at the time. And additionally, also, yeah, I guess we'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, I call the question.
I haven't met enough people yet.
Okay, then I'll talk. All right, so honestly, like just on the Silk Fund, to add to what John said, I really still believe in a clubs building. I think that's like one of the things we need the most at Concordia, so that's why I don't support touching the Silk Fund.
Can I just say that?
That wasn't a question.
Yeah, okay.
But, yeah.
That's it.
Oh, okay. Eduardo?
I forgot, I'm sorry.
Okay. Marcus?
Yeah, so as was made a point by Olivia as well, and despite some of the allegations in the room, we have, I believe, been operating in good faith this entire time, and if council is making the passing of this question and going to ballot fully contingent on the removal of the second question, then C's will see that done. And we will not, or we will, to the best of our ability, I'm not sure because it's already submitted, we will not advocate for the input to referendum as per the will of council expressed through the conversation here.
Thank you. Rowan?
I just amend the amendment to totally contingent on no amount of fee levy be taken from the Silk Fund in the council motion instead of the referendum question, just for clarity's sake.
Sorry. Could you repeat that?
Like the contingent on no amount of the fee levy being taken from the silk fund. Can I amend to have that taken out of the referendum question and put in the council motion?
Oh, okay, so, do we have the full motion? So how would it read I know what you mean, but, do you have the beginning
Resolve that
part?
council send the following referendum question to ballot contingent on no amount of the fee levy being taken from the silk fund.
Forever and ever.
Just
Okay, do we have a second? Yeah, be a resolve that, sorry. Do we have a second? Margot, is there any opposition to changing it? Okay, that works.
Sorry to do like parallel your question. Are we able to, say, change our standing regulations such that it's literally impossible for something other than council to approve questions affecting our fee levy? Even if it's like these sort of backdoor efforts to do 2 referendums they're trying. Can we change the possibility that it literally is not possible to do what they're trying to do, which should be discouraged?
It's the bylaws that say that only council can decide the fee levy, not the standing regs. So you can't notwithstand a bylaw to begin with. There is a sketchy way to get around a bylaw, but it's like really sketchy. And you have to basically vote to do something you have to vote to change the bylaw, and I think it's like a 4/5 majority so that it only comes into effect at a general election or a by-election. And then if you like don't go down that route, you've just been breaking a bylaw for a while, and then you don't. Anyways.
I know, but why can't we just put in the standing regs? It would be less high level and secure than a bylaw. So put a regulation in.
I mean, you can put a regulation in the standing regs as well, but there's already a bylaw that says that only council can decide. I think I might not be understanding the question.
How do we make their 2-step process, which shouldn't be done by anybody, because other organizations' fee levy should not be seen as piggy banks waiting to be reallocated? How do we make that not happen?
We can do that. We can do that at last meeting, we don't have to do it now.
Okay.
Yeah, because usually the yeah, what Michaela said. Yes. Rowan? Did you just speak? Oh.
I think I accidentally held up Ron's placard.
Oh, Margot.
Yeah, I just wanted to address the folks who have been sitting here for a really long time. Thank you for like coming out and like standing up for something you're into. Like you guys are like witnessing this. You guys are part of C's. Like, can I get nodded heads that you're like happy with this idea that you're not going to touch the legal contingency fund and you get to run your fee levy campaign? Yes? Yes. Yes. Woo! Okay. You're not part of C's. No. Okay. Okay. Like general consensus. Okay. Hold these folks accountable. They seem to do a lot of talking. They're lovely. We love their voices, but also groovy. Let's vote on this thing.
Thank you. Jigger?
I call the question.
Okay. Do we have a second? Jane. All right. So the calling the question is currently on the amendment, which is to add the part about contingent on no amount of the fee levy be taken from the silk fund. So not the whole motion of sending to referendum, just that amendment. All good?
Information.
Yes.
For this and then the following thing, if it's passed, it requires a 2/3 majority to.
Both. No, sorry, the amendment doesn't. This second question does. So sending it to referendum requires a 2/3.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. So is there any opposition to calling the question on the amendment? Okay. So all those in favor of the amendment, please raise your placards. 11, 12. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. So that.
Abstention noted.
Abstention? Okay, so abstentions are Rory, Sammy, Patrick, and that's it. Alright, so the amendment carries, and we're back on the main speakers list, which is Jane, James, John, ooh, that was complicated, Patrick, Sophie, Lee, Chris, other Patrick, other Sophie, Margot, Danielle, Rowan, Sam.
I just stand blank.
Okay. Jane?
Could I go after the J's?
J's.
But after the 2 next J's. It's been a while.
Also, I think one of the speakers
Sorry.
I think Olivia wanted to be put on.
Oh, okay, perfect, sorry, missed that. James.
Alright, so, once again, like, we're going to be voting on whether or not to give, you know, these people a green light essentially to become a fee levy organization. And despite, you know, like, the sentiment of the amendment was good, like, I don't want, like, I advocated against the fee levy restructuring because I thought it was too much plundering of the silk fund, right, and that we should have just gone ahead with increasing the club fee levies, right? I don't want the silk fund touched. I think it's a nice sentiment, but even so, like, that doesn't change, like, the fact that, you know, we as council, right, are, when it comes to referendum, are a green light organization, and will we give the green light to Cs? And personally, I don't think that we should, because I think that, you know, this student money, this is a large sum, this is $250,000, right? Can be used in other ways more effectively, especially, like, for example, the largest amount that Cs can give to any group is $16,000, right? That $16,000 comes along with, let me just do a bit of calculations, $40,000 $60,000 of ancillary costs that are used to pay the salaries of Cs, their office supplies, and everything else. So for that one group of $16,000 is going to get their $60,000 of hidden costs that are eaten up by the organization. I think that a much better situation, if there is a co-op that wants money, that needs funding to start up, it's better for us to give that money directly and avoid the $60,000 of extra costs that's going to result from, you know, the process of these. So even if, you know, like we have a referendum was passed that says that we should be supporting stuff like co-ops on campus and by the student community, well, a better way to do it would be to have more transparency by having that money controlled by council and not by an external organization, right, that can do with that money what it wants, give that money to any organization that it wants, regardless of if it's a Concordia affiliated organization or a student organization, so long as it's a co-op, a solidarity economy initiative. Now, I can disagree with their vision as much as I want, but this is kind of fundamental, that this money will be given into a third party organization, $250,000. 75% of it will go to the upkeep of that third party organization, and only 25% will filter down to organizations that we don't know who they are, we don't know how they operate, and we don't know how accountable, so there will be no accountability for that money after this point. That's how fee levy groups essentially operate at Concordia, is that they become third parties. CSU doesn't get to go in and undo their fee levy just because we don't like their finances. That has to go essentially through the same process to remove a fee levy as to grant one. So we can't go in there and audit them. We can't go in there and see that these groups are actually Concordia student groups they're giving money to.
Oh, yeah, sorry, it's about to.
Right, okay, so I would urge you to vote no, essentially, on those principles.
John?
Iverson.
Okay, Jean?
Great, so now I may have missed this part in the bylaws, but our duties as counselors regarding approving fee levy applications isn't about the mandates of those fee levy organizations. It's about whether or not they have a feasible budget, whether or not they have a harassment policy in place.
That's policy committee. Yeah. And it's that's the standing reg, and that part applies to policy committee, not to council. The only part that applies to council is council 2/3.
Okay. I have this whole bit about seagull extermination I was going to go on, but...
Sorry.
Okay, so in a way, continuing off of what was just said, what I'm worried about, I missed the February meeting, so feel free, anyone, counselors and others, to interrupt me if I say anything wrong. But I understood that not only the courses, but C's doesn't intend to only benefit Concordia student groups and organizations. And what bothers me about that is, again, as just said by James, we can't come in and monitor who you're giving money to. So essentially, we could be taking money from a large group of students, in my eyes, a very large amount of money considering what other fee levies get. And that could be going to groups that are potentially not Concordian. And as much as I support the idea of having something like this, I don't think it's right to get all of that money from Concordia. So I don't know if you guys are asking for money like this from McGill or other student unions as well. But it's, I don't want to say inordinate considering that you guys are trying to achieve something very large, and I respect that. But it's just, we have no power of oversight here, and it really just clashes what I think is the aim of approving fee levies. That's more or less all I have to say on the subject.
Thank you. Sophie B?
Well, I would just like to clarify something. Like, it's really common for salaries to take a large part of budgets. So I think we should just remember that. If we look at other fee levy organizations, it takes a large chunk of the budget, and I think we shouldn't really that much consider what they like their budget and like how they would run the organization, because essentially like that's not our role. I don't think so, and like fee levy are independent, so I think we should still keep that in mind. Yeah, I don't think it's the CSU's role to oversight and what the fee levy is doing. I just would like to, for us to remember that when considering the question.
Thank you. Lee?
Yeah, I was gonna ask something that you said regarding to the last amendment where you're agreeing with it, and I feel free to correct me if I'm wrong because I am paraphrasing. But essentially it was saying, oh, I agree to it, but it has been submitted, and then I will not advocate for that. So doesn't that remove the aspect of the second of the amendment where it doesn't really apply because it's already submitted?
Right. So that was just reflective of the fact that I'm not sure of like the CSU policies and procedures on that on the spot, but like what I'm saying is that we will, like for example, email the CEO should this pass, and express our intention that the second referendum, express that we do not want the second referendum question to go to ballot, and CC the executives for transparency's sake. And I'm not sure if there's anything else we could do within our power to ensure that that does not go to ballot as the people submitting it, but we will. Yeah, again, I'm just not sure about the CSU regulations on that, but our intention would be, as we expressed, to follow in good faith whatever the discussion's outcome is at this meeting.
Well, just to clarify the regulations part, the CEO can change the wording if it's deemed prejudicial, et cetera, but like you wouldn't be able, like Marcus, you wouldn't be able to go to the CEO, not that you're going to, and ask to change the CSU fee levy because that would go against the bylaw. So the CEO can change the wording in as much as it's prejudicial, but they can't like break bylaws to do it or anything.
And just
to
on that note, point of information, because of the wording of the second referendum question, it can't go to ballot because council didn't approve the amount.
Thank you. Chris?
Oh, nice. Okay, just two comments on things that have been said throughout this council. So the first thing was said by a fellow councillor, I think with the best intentions, but it was this idea that like C's went to policy committee, they worked with them, they worked very hard, and it's like odd that these concerns are coming up just now. I mean, the reality is I don't sit on policy committee. The majority of us do not sit on policy committee, so we did not get the opportunity to look at this project until now. And even, you know, you could say, oh, why weren't you interested? Like, there's a lot of committees, there's a lot of things going on. The union has more than enough work for everyone, if not too much work. The second comment is on the gatekeeper thing. I think it's necessary to have a gatekeeper because at the end of the day, when you go to the ballot, I mean, no student's going to open up all the finances of an organization, the budget, and the bylaws and start understanding the institution. They're just gonna go, do I like this idea, yes or no? That's why we have a gatekeeper. It's to filter out different fee levy groups that submit an application in order to understand whether or not it's responsible and then to bring that to the ballot. So just on those two comments, I mean, I understand why people are bringing up their concerns now, if ever, and I absolutely do not think it's a bad thing that council acts as a gatekeeper.
Thank you. Sophie? H.
basically, I just wanted to bring up something that was mentioned regarding people on council and executives not like talking to people involved with Cs. I know that some folks might not be aware of this. Executives work, we're expected to work full-time. We are also all in classes. We oversee a lot of committees. We sit on a lot of administrative committees, and when a fee levy wants to petition, it's not always in our capacity to like chase down and follow up. After I brought up in October the bylaws, I did not anticipate to have to keep elaborating that in the bylaws it states this. That's like a thing. I was open when it came up in October, and then I never heard about it again until it came up after it had been submitted to policy committee without the fee levy question. So like that's just clarification. I'm pretty sure all the executives are on the same page with that. And I think that it's equally disappointing for students to hear that the like student union is like working at a different capacity. I also just want to state what John said earlier. I was actually on a panel on the social economy last week. I don't know if many of you know that. It was at Université Laval, and I got to talk about the awesome, unique social economy like network that we have at Concordia in the context of the Quebec social economy, and it was really awesome. I got to attend a lot of workshops. It was really great, and it really frustrated me that we had to have this discourse and this dialogue because, like, I'm glad that we're now at a point where the Silk Fund is not up for grabs, but just to stress that, like, the social economy is something that I think a lot of people in this room are here for, and our issue is not with the social economy. Our issue is with, rather than asking for a 70-cent fee levy for yourselves, you tried to take a fee levy from our like very fundamental and good and like thing that we have that enables us to do amazing advocacy work and support amazing student projects. And we don't mean this to like take away from the work that you could do. It's literally just like there's enough for everyone, and yeah.
Thank you. Margot? Call to question. Okay, we have a second for calling the question. Jared, is there any opposition to calling the question? Okay.
My personal privilege, I was on the speakers list and I wanted to speak, and it seems like I was forgotten. Raised my placard a few times. And so I would like to also voice my
I have
opinion.
you as right before Sophie. Did I not call you?
No, you have not called
sorry.
me.
Okay, my mistake. My apologies. Is it okay, Patrick?
Can I speak as well?
Yeah, you were a little bit further.
Okay, so first of all, I would like to echo the sentiment that council, we act as gatekeepers. Thing is that students don't know what they're signing on to. I can attest to that. I worked on the online voting petition, and people just sign stuff, and they just want you to go away. So, anyways, so to touch on a few points. So the first part is that when I was looking over these bylaws, I found membership to be a bit inaccessible in the fact that, number one, certain classes of membership had working hours to be working for free. From what I saw, that's based on the information that was available to me. And they would have to pay, some would have to pay a certain percentage of their annual salary, maybe a lump sum fee. And that to me struck me as quite inaccessible. And as brought up by Rory, this also is a bit financially unsustainable in the fact that indexed to inflation, you're going to be coming back again, and since you're also having salary increases of 5, 10%, whatever it was, that's fine. And also touching upon the point about what was voted on in the 2015-2016 by-election, it never said that it specifically had to be C's. It could be any solidarity economy incubator. And so another solidarity economy incubator can come back. That's fine. Another problem I had with this was that I have heard of 0 success stories coming from this. We're basically throwing money at this, potentially. And so I haven't heard any success stories about this. And that to me was a problem because honestly, maybe a JMSB student can attest to this. They've been in boardrooms. You usually need to see the numbers and what's happened before you actually give money to something. And this to me tonight has shown that we actually need to reform the fee levy process so that we have a bit more oversight about these things, because students, they honestly, they just don't care, and we're there to be acting on the best interest of students, and I think that we really need to change the fee levy approval process, but yeah, that's basically what I wanted to say.
And then we'll take a vote on that question.
So I just want to say that 5% raise is pretty standard throughout the industry and throughout multiple fee levies at Concordia. And the reason that is so is because it gives an incentive for workers to stay at the organization instead of moving on and using it as a stepping stone, and that maintains institutional memory. Additionally, to regard your questions about paying into and or giving labor, that is pretty standard for co-ops. Either they're like the Hive or the bookstore that is both funded here, requires you to pay a fee, and we're giving the option for people to give their time instead. In regards to the...
Point of information before you move on to that point.
If you want to answer the question.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I did do the math. It was 8.5% cumulative annual growth rate. So not 5%, but I'll let you move on.
Okay. Well, perhaps there was an error, and the budget is open to amendment by our membership. In regards to the CSU funding co-ops individually, it takes a lot of social capital and privilege in order to be able to present your own co-op that you come up with yourself with no resources that are in one place that are in English for you to have access to. So I think that's an unreasonable request, and that having a third party facilitate that increases accessibility and inclusion into the social economy. Also regarding transparency concerns, it was never our intention to be untransparent, and the only reason it may be presented that way is because we don't actually have any money. So like all our things are, like for our budget, it is up for question by our membership and for co-creation as most cooperatives do. Also regarding community concerns, so if we look at all incubators, so D3 is an example that we have on campus. McGill has its own incubator service that they have on their campus, and the way it works is usually you have to, when you're subscribing, you have to say like if you're alumni or you're student, and they take that into consideration in what services they offer you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so there's a motion to call the question. Yes?
I think I was in the first. Yeah, and I was too.
Oh yeah, it might have been on the amendment, because I have you both on the speakers list, but later on.
Okay.
So it might have been for the amendment, and then it got bumped, and then back and forth, sorry. But yeah, but the thing is about calling the question is if there's still people who want to speak, you can vote it down as well. It requires a 2/3. So all those in favor of calling the question, please raise your placards. Okay.
Wait, can we restart that?
Okay, yeah, can we just hold them high? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 12 over 16, just so we have the numbers right. 75. Okay, so that is a 2/3. So the question's been called, so now we're voting on the main motion, which is to send the entirety of the motion sorry, to referendum. So all those in favor of sending, is anyone, yes? Do we need it?
The motion is now the motion with the amendment.
Yes.
The contingency.
Yeah. So, I will, well, actually I don't have to read it, so I'll do it. So yeah, you can read it, it's easier than me saying it. Is everyone understood? All right, so all those in favor of sending the question to referendum, please raise your placards. 1, 2, raise them high, 3, 4. So that's 4. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All right, so that's 4 over 9. An abstention, Sophie B, Margot, Zoe, and Patrick Lavoie. Yeah, Margot. All right, Victoria, and Patrick Lavoie. All right, so the motion to send to referendum fails, and we're back on the main speakers list, which is no one, so Rory.
It's actually a question, and it's a question that I want to follow with a statement. So I'd like to verify with John, if I may. My understanding is that the Silk Fund is a designated fund for a separate fee levy that we created years ago, and as such falls under what's called restricted funds accounting, which means that the funds in there can only be used for the purpose of which that fund was created. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So similar to how CSU's operating budget, club's budget, our services, et cetera, are separate fee levies, they're separate funds, it can only be used for the purpose of those funds.
The only non-restricted fund is the operations budget.
Okay, so the operations one is, but silk is restricted. So technically then, it's impossible for us to have something like this happen in the future. Because the silk fund is for student space, accessible education, and legal contingencies. If it's restricted funds accounting for those purposes, and this doesn't fill those purposes, regardless of what they do at referendum, regardless of if all 30,000 students vote for it, we legally, according to accounting rules, cannot take money from it for that reason. Do I understand this correctly?
Do you want to respond, Sean?
If there's a referendum question voted by students to reduce the value of the levy,
Doesn't change accounting rules.
so there's two ways to go about it. One is put a single question, we will create this fee levy, and Silk's going to pay for it. The other way to do is, we're going to build a wall, first question, and Mexico's going to pay for it, second question. That's what they're trying to do.
But it's still, we can't take money from that fund, period, whether students vote for it or not. We can't.
They're trying to lower the fee level.
Lower the silk fee levy in order to then give that money to them, just not directly, is what you're saying.
We're getting close to time currently. There was just did you have a comment in the back?
Yeah. I want to speak with Patrick and Chris said about students not being able to process projects by themselves. I find that very condescending to students to say that they are not able to take effect and know what projects are. Given the information and the proper channels by the CSU or whatever else organization is there, students will be interested and will want to know how things work. That being said, for the bylaws and all that were not available before, I can understand that. They would definitely be available to students would this question have gone to referendum. So I just want to ask, do you take students for idiots?
No, I don't. But I do think, I'm just going to be realistic. When I know myself, when at a ballot, first of all, I've never seen an organization make their finances and their bylaws available to students during a referendum. So that's unprecedented. And I don't think it would have ever happened had this came up today. Maybe if it did come up today, it would have happened, but nobody proposed it.
Okay.
Secondly, people have lives, and their lives aren't just what's going to be on a referendum ballot. Our turnout is 4%.
Yep.
And I do not think the mass majority of students have time. First of all, they're not even aware that these organizations exist. But even then, when they see the ballot, it's usually the first time they're ever learning of these initiatives. So I don't take students for idiots. I take students for what they are, people who are usually uninformed. And that is why I think we need to have a council, which is full of people, who dedicate 6 hours a month to talking about projects to filter out what is in the best interest and not in the best interest of the students. And I'm not saying C's is in the best interest or in the worst interest, but I'm saying I was shown what I was shown, and I personally do not think it's in the best interest of the students.
Did you have a follow-up? Also, sorry, what's your name for the minutes?
Nicholas.
Nicholas, okay, thank you.
I wasn't talking about C's at this point. I was mentioning talking about the very contentious point that you brought up, that students cannot be informed or properly informed about projects, and that therefore the council itself has to be the voice of the students, which they did not send a referendum for all of them for every decision. Therefore, you represent yourself, you represent the organization you're here for, the student body, your organization, whatever. But to say that it's better for this council to stop projects because students will not have time, be ill-informed, that is taking away from people's personal preferences. And that's a very dangerous rhetoric.
That's all. At this point, we are over time, so I don't know if council wants to continue discussion on the agenda point. If there's any interest for it, do speak now, or we'll continue on with the agenda, Jane? Yeah, that's why I'm saying, is there any appetite to continue with the speakers list, because we're over time, so meaning we'd have to...
I just have concerns that if we voted this referendum question down, they've still submitted that one for referendum. And seeing as we didn't pass, like, I know we're saying they can't do it. I know we're saying they can't. But they're gonna. Like, what do we do about that?
Okay, first we have to decide if we're gonna talk about this for another X amount of minutes. Rowan?
6 minutes.
6 minutes? Okay, that gives us.
Just enough.
That gives us to 11:23. Is there any, first of all, is there a second? Jane, is there any opposition? Okay, so, Rory, I have you, did you just speak? Yeah, you did, okay. Patrick?
Well, I was supposed to just
There's an answer.
Yeah, something weird happened with my list, sorry about that.
Okay, so that was a question?
Yes.
Okay, so, basically, the referendum question has been submitted to the CEO. I'm in communication with the CEO. I've expressed like all of the bylaws to the CEO, and we're having a meeting tomorrow where I can bring the motion that council passed or failed to pass and like all of the conversation and just like to the CEO, do this. And if they really want to, they can try and contest through judicial board, who at the end of the day looks at what's in the bylaws and whether or not it contravenes the bylaws. And what contravenes the bylaws was the process that followed to get to referendum question.
Point of personal.
Yes?
Wait, the cell phone question goes directly to CEO and then to referendum and doesn't pass by us?
Well, that's why it can't go to the ballot. So it was submitted to the CEO without the amount being approved by council. So we're clear, not follow the process in the bylaws. And it can't go to the ballot. I've said this so many times.
Thank you.
Doesn't mean you're not trying.
Jared?
Oh, yeah, I was gonna call a question.
Oh, okay.
But there's no question. Oh, wait, no, I remember what I was gonna say. Yeah, I was just gonna remind everyone that it's like 11:21 p.m.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
I will
that's what.
but Jane?
Right, so I actually was gonna move to extend the meeting until 12 midnight, just because last time we went up to that time, we still have a few points, and I don't want us to keep extending by 5 minutes in chunks, just because that puts us under undue pressure, and in the end, we're just gonna take that amount of time anyways, so I'd rather we just extend till, like, by extra half hour.
Is that a second?
Yes, it is.
Is there any opposition to, yes, okay, so we are voting on extending, sorry, memory blank. All right, so all those in favor of extending until midnight, please raise your placards. Requires a 2/3. 9, all those opposed? 1. Okay, so in that case, it carries, it's a maximum as well. Yes, John?
Oh, let me just go. The meeting will not be recorded beyond 11:30, because Louise has to go home. She's like,
What time is it now?
It's 11:20.
Oh, okay, 10
Okay,
minutes.
that's fine.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're back on the main list. Eduardo.
I rescind.
Okay, Rowan.
I rescind.
Patrick.
I have a midterm tomorrow, so if I could politely ask to be allowed to leave.
Yeah, excusals for 60 minutes or more, so like the council's not gonna go another 60 minutes.
All right.
Likely, we do have a couple of excusals to deal with now that you've reminded me, which we will after this point is dead and gone. Also bad. Rowan?
Sorry, CEO presenting today?
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot to clarify, the CEOs, they came in February and answered some questions, and they were supposed to come back with their report, but they weren't available last time, and I messaged them to the CEO email, which is now controlled by somebody else, so I didn't get a response, so I texted them yesterday, and they said I have class on Wednesday nights. So, if you have questions for the CEO, I can try to bring them back next council. They may still have class on Wednesday nights. Yeah, the old CEO, sorry.
Not the new CEO.
Not the new CEO. But if council doesn't have any questions about the CEO's report, it can be approved as well. But it was kind of just tabled to the next meeting. Sorry, I forgot to mention what happened there. So yeah, but the report was sent out to council, and yeah, it's basically if you have questions. Jared?
Well, just on that, if people do have questions, maybe could I suggest having a special council to deal with this, so we avoid having it on Wednesday night when they would have class?
Yeah, that's possible. I'd have to gauge, yeah, I can gauge interest in who has questions as well, so like we can put a poll and then people can raise their metaphorical placards. Thank you. Okay, I will accept that. And we will move on to external committee. That was Danielle.
Okay, okay, so I don't know how this works, so I just.
Just
Explain.
move to approve the report if that's, like, do you just have questions about the report?
I have questions about the report.
Okay, do you think they will prevent you, if you just have a couple of questions, but like, if you get them answered, you'll approve the report, like, just start with a motion to approve the report, and then we can go on from there.
Okay, so I motion to approve the report.
Okay, good, second, Rory, and then Mallory.
Okay, so on the report, I was a little bit confused, for the JMSB Ambassador Gala, there was a funding application for that, and I was just kind of wondering what the external committee has to say about that, as all they said was it doesn't fall under the CSU positions book, and I didn't see on the positions book anything that, I don't know, related to a JMSB Ambassador Gala, so I just was wondering, like, what exactly that has to do with that?
Yeah, I can answer that question. Okay. And if other person from external also wants to answer it. So basically the mandate of the external committee is to fund applications that are with the position book and not necessarily that like are just like falling out, if that makes sense. Sorry, it's late. So it's like, for example, you have an event on the power of recycling that goes like under like some of the position we have under sustainability, or if you have an event on BDS, which we have a position on this. And what we did for this application is that we went through the policies, not the policies, the positions, and there were one that was on international conflict and relation, but it was a stretch. It was a stretch to really affiliate this gala to the like this position in particular, because most of them are very political, and the thing with the JMSB Ambassador Gala is that there were no cause attached to it. So it was kind of like a general meeting on, or not a general meeting, but a general event on talking about like what it is to be a diplomat, if I remember correctly, or an ambassador. Yes, an ambassador, and then having like a network party at the end, or a network event. And the thing is that it does not enter into any like social justice subject or political subject that we have as the CSU. And it was a very long conversation, as you can see. But this is why basically we denied the application.
Did you have follow-up?
I'm just kind of curious, like, I don't see it anywhere in like the funding section of like the standing regulations. I'm assuming that's where it's coming from?
No, it's not the Facebook group, but the website. So if you go funding CSU,
that would be funding.csu.qc.ca. Do you mind if Margot gives some context?
Also, so like there's a bunch of different committees for like these sorts of funding application, and it was just like discussed that this is more something that like could be discussed by like student life or like something like that. And external is like very specific on like what they deal in, and it didn't fall under that register. So.
And what do you guys do? You specifically deal with the positions book?
Yeah. And mobilization, external and mobilization.
Oh, I was just gonna add, like, when I was a counselor, I was also on this committee, and it's often external groups that you fund, that's connected to the Concordia population in some way. So, yeah, it could be like, even like a festival or something, and it's how Concordia can be connected to outside, not internal, where Marcus said student life would might be a better option.
I found it.
Yeah, go ahead.
So if you want, I can put it on the Facebook page if it works. But if you select on the CSU website funding, and then it's, I think it's information on funding or something like this, you have external mobilization, like external mobilization committee, event projects, initiatives that align with the CSU position book.
Thank you. Michelle?
If it changes, sorry, I missed the beginning of this, I was in the washroom, but they were approved for Student Life Initiative funding just a couple days ago, which is why the minutes are not in this meeting's documents. But I just wanted to mention that, yeah, it falls more in line with student life, and they were given funding.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, that being said, there's no more discussion. Okay, all those in favor of approving the report? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 10, 11, 12. All those opposed? 0.
Can I have my abstention noted?
Yeah, and Lee abstains. All right, so if there's nothing further, Rory?
Instead of moving on to like the next thing, can we just identify what needs to be talked about tonight in the next 30 minutes? Because this point, which was just approving a consent agenda item, has taken 10. So like, we only get 10, 2 more things to do, and let's start prioritizing here.
I can, let me say this really quick. Last meeting's minutes, Elizabeth sent a draft to John and CC'd me, and I thought Elizabeth was sending me the minutes, so I accidentally sent out the draft ones. So that's why they're all kind of weird. Was that your question?
Actually, I received the revised ones.
Okay.
I still have amendments mostly to what I said, so I'd just like to.
Okay, so
amend my
so we'll deal with that after. Yeah, so what has to be dealt with?
Students for consent culture absolutely has to be dealt with.
Okay.
Can we just move the retreat one to just policy? Like, are we down for that?
We can table that to policy. I mean, we'll pass a motion, but yeah, that can be dealt with today. Okay, so if students for consent culture has to be dealt with today, then we'll deal with it next, as it is.
And compensation for their minute keeping, for you, it's money for you, but it's like, we should be able to pass that quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, likely. Yes.
It's 11:30 was the motion?
Yes, well, yeah.
Well, it was
30 minutes, so we'll, all right, Sophie, students for consent culture.
Actually, before you start, can I just have like a quick thing? Before everybody start going, when you leave after this meeting, the person that is doing the cleaning asked us to put the table back. So just before you all leave.
Like classroom setup.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, quick. Yeah.
Just after Louise leaves, can someone turn on the audio recording as per the motion passed last council?
Yeah. Alright, thank you. Sophie.
Be it resolved that the CSU approve the memorandum of understanding between Students for Consent Culture and the Concordia Student Union regarding the release of the R-Turn 1 year later report.
Alright, second, Margot. Sophie, your motivation?
I mean, we've been collaborating with the organization formerly known as R-Turn for a while now, and it's really important work, especially in the current Concordia climate, with all the work going on surrounding the English department, the creative writing department, sexual violence writ broad across campus, a CSU campaign, continuing to support Students for Consent Culture, and collaborating with the R-Turn 1 year later report within the memorandum of understanding is just like really important, and it's good work for us to be doing, and it also provides a little extra push for the advocacy work we're doing at the administration, so.
Thank you. Okay, any discussion? Okay, is there any opposition to the motion as read by Sophie? All right, so that, oh, sorry, it was in the past minutes, I'll send it to you, in the past meeting package. Okay, so that is approved by a unanimous consent. Or were you just?
I was waiting to vote.
Oh. All right, yeah, so if there's no opposition, it's unanimous. Strategic planning ad hoc?
Compensation for a minute.
Yeah. Okay, this was a motion brought by Caleb like 2 meetings ago when Caleb was.
Yeah, January.
Okay, let me find the wording. It was supposed to be amended or something, if I recall correctly, and then brought back, but I don't know if that ever happened.
Everyone's got a copy.
Okay.
No, we should read it out loud, not everyone has their laptop.
Yeah, let me just find it as well.